Chapter 1: Massive Earthquake. The nation of crows, the city of Xie, had just entered the end of autumn. These ugly and intelligent life forms were the true masters of this city. They gathered upon the rows of trees, and with coarse, raspy, monotone voices, made fun of the scurrying travelers coming to and fro. Car, get screwed. Underneath the spoke-shaped, cloud-filled skies, they would occasionally flaunt their superior flying techniques. The majority of the travelers held unsightly expressions as if their parents had died. They glared with expressions of hate at the circling shadows above and at the strange formation of mist higher above. The skies of the city of Xie was covered by this mist upon entering the end of the 9th month. An approximate total of 6 grade 3, 3 grade 4, and 5 grade 2 earthquakes had happened in under a week's worth of time. The magnitude and intensity of the earthquakes had yet to reach the limits to what the city could withstand, but the frail hearts of men were already rattled. Sound and electric waves permeated through the city Xie's atmosphere. Over half of the noise were of people shouting with all their might. Massive earthquake, massive earthquake. Right when modern civilization entered into the 22nd century, various experts and scholars spoke of this kind of social theory openly, appearing in all sorts of media and reports. Luo Nan was somewhat influenced by this. He held under his arm a black leather notebook that had never left his side, and he walked to the underground subway. At this time, the band on his wrist vibrated, receiving a signal. His aunt, Mrs. Luo Nan, pelted him with words. "Come back home at night. Your uncle already finished making dinner." His aunt had originally allowed him to live life independently, but due to the frequent earthquakes, she shredded their agreement and ordered over and over for him to return to their residence to take good care of the house. Luo Nan absolutely couldn't agree to this. He had painstakingly tested into Acumen College. Didn't he do that for days of freedom and independence? What's more was that he was at a critical juncture. Who knows what consequences would occur if he tarried for a day? The problem was that Luo Nan was never good with words. There wasn't a hint of persuasiveness in any of the arguments he brought up. The situation was becoming colder and colder. His aunt seemed to stare and reach out through the telephone to carry him home. Some information was sent over right when Luo Nan was getting a headache. Luo Nan just skimmed it over, and he secretly exclaimed a breath in luck. He hurriedly added another counterpoint. "I have to prepare for an interview tomorrow with a society." "Interview with which society?" "The Mystic Arts Research Society." "Mystic Arts?" Madame Luo Nan was somewhat suspicious. Soon she called off to some corner. Mo yes. A somewhat hoarse voice, with a uniquely lazy tone, entered the conversation not too long later. This was Luo Nan's older female cousin Moya. She had just graduated last year from Acumen College. "The Mystic Arts Research Society, I know them. Rumor has it that they have a lot of money and that their members are quite impulsive." Luo Nan hated this attitude of her daughter the most, rebuking her on the spot. "Talk properly." Moya laughed with a ha and said, "Your dear son is in a bad situation. School starts in a month, and he's still interviewing. Clearly, he's a misfit. Major things flow together in Acumen University, and Western thought is very critical there. First, school credits are cut if one doesn't live in a society, and even when going to the next grade, it will be hard to find an academic advisor with good things to say in a letter of recommendation." From this manner of speaking, which was like pouring oil on the fire, the mother-daughter war ignited once again in a flash. The focus of conflict shifted. allowing for the Luo Nan of over 100 kilometers away to escape unscathed. Luo Nan had been standing in his own family's living room for nearly half an hour by now. The sky had already turned dark, and the living room lights automatically lit up, casting his figure to the window of a high-rise apartment building across the street. Luo Nan spoke a command to cause the window curtains to close automatically. But right at this moment, a dark shadow passed through the nearly closed curtain and fell onto the open balcony. It used its thick beak to part open the sliding glass door. It walked inside, strutting in a completely free and leisurely manner. This uninvited fellow was a typical Corvus frugilgus, or rook. Its entire body was jet black aside from its ashen white beak. It looked to be thick, solid, and well-built, appearing to be larger than its kind by a factor. Its feathers fluctuated between a deep black and a hidden blue under the soft lighting. It strolled around in the room for a few steps. It leaped onto a small coffee table in the living room with a shake of its wings and immediately leaned forward with its body. A sealed glass test tube the size of a thumb slipped out from its thick beak and fell onto the coffee table. A large amount of white powder was inside the tube. Having spat out the foreign object in its throat, the crow sat comfortably for a long time. It showed off its bright and clear voice. "Kua, kua. Link, shut up." The cries of this crow would spell disaster in this sealed, empty room. Luo Nan chided the crow quickly, grabbed the test tube to clean, and took out a cooked strip of meat prepared beforehand to stuff up the crow's beak. This crow named Ink was still able to communicate quite well. It ate in a very elegant fashion and even used its wing to indicate to Luo Nan to pour for it some water. There was also a dinner placed on the dining table to the side. The fragrance was nothing to write home about, keeping perfectly in line with the monotonous labor of a home artificial intelligence. The important thing was that the quantity of food was sufficient. It was enough to fill 3 to 5 people without a problem. Luo Nan displayed a first-class superhuman appetite and ate at astonishing speeds. Coincidentally, he finished eating at the same time as Ink. After Ink drank and ate its fill, it simply squeezed out of the sliding door window, flapped its wings, and flew away. Luo Nan tidied up the cups and dishes. His wristband vibrated once again right before he wanted to enter the study. This time it was his cousin Mo Ye who contacted him. Mo Ye and her mother were completely carved from the same mold. She pelted him with words. "How are you going to thank me for this time?" "Hick, thanks, sister." "Tusk, you don't even know how to exchange pleasantries." Mo Ye knew that Luo Nan talked awkwardly, so she didn't press further. She cut directly to the chase by asking, "Was that Mystic Arts Research Society suggested by other people, or did you go for it on your own accord?" "I chose it myself." "Do you know what kind of place it is?" Luo Nan thought for a bit and answered simply, "It has the characteristics of being half a society and half a research institution. Its strength is robust from its private funding. There is a high degree of autonomy when compared to the college." Mo Ye sneered, "Doesn't that appear awesome?" Luo Nan didn't know how to respond for some time. Mo Ye reminded him, "That place is the playground for the children of the wealthy." The core members formed their own circle. They research a few fantastical oddities each day to kill time. Normal students of families would become low-level workers, no matter where they go. So this place looks quite beautiful. But it's only beautiful for those in that circle. It has nothing to do with studies or technical skill. Luo Nan interrupted Mo Ye's lecture. "Experiments can be done there." Moya dragged out her voice, sighing. Oh, looks like you've been experimenting more and more crazily. But dear brother, you should go to a physics or chemistry-related interest society if you want to do experiments. Luo Nan responded calmly. Those societies require you to go through a period of internship. I've already acquired the relevant skills from middle school. I don't need to do this kind of work that I've already done again. The Mystic Arts Research Society is fine with that. Yes, I looked at their intro package and also the school forums. It's the only society where a complete newbie can start an experiment freely and independently. And there's a lot of resources that touch on the field of psychotropic drugs, which is precisely what I need. Moya sneered. An unskilled worker can start his own independent experiment. Perhaps it's fine for a skilled worker. It would be quite wonderful if the boss is an amateur. The usually sharp-tongued Moya was actually stifled by these words from Luo Nan. It took a few seconds before she could open her mouth. All right, Mr. Skilled Worker. I just want to remind you of something. You will be labeled as a misfit for sure if you were to switch societies in Acumen College. The following 4 years. Oh wait, you're in the 10th grade. Then you will have plenty of time to regret your decision for the next 8 years. Luo Nan's response caused Moya to sneer. All righty, let's talk about the issue with the reward. Reward? I staved off a bullet for you without regards for my own safety. You think a simple thanks would be enough? Hick, what do you want? Lend that apartment of yours to me for a night to host a small party. Luo Nan hesitated. Which day? 20 days later, the 15th of next month. 19 days. Fine then, 19 days. I don't need you to prepare anything special. All you need to do is to hide and remove your shameful stuff. I'll fix up what's left. Luo Nan calculated the time. Shouldn't be a problem. Remind me 5 days earlier, though, to give me a heads-up reminder. Not cool. Well, that's how it is. The call was hung up by the other side. Luo Nan started to get a headache from thinking of finding a place to temporarily relocate to 19 days later. Although things were this way, he was still grateful for Moya. If it weren't for his older female cousin covering up for him for several years, how would he have been able to continue with his dangerous experiments under the eyes of his aunt? Luo Nan shook his head, making a decision. He'll think about all this stuff tomorrow. It was presently 2096 AD, September 26, 1922. The fruitless day was finally over. Luo Nan welcomed the precious and tranquil time of night. He walked into the study. A black leather suitcase was standing upright on the cable. It had a decent size to it and looked rather towering. Luo Nan submitted his fingerprint and entered in the password, causing the suitcase lid to open up with a low, thin hiss. Tools and instruments were laid orderly inside. Layers and layers of shelves were lifted up. The extension of each shelf was like the spreading of flower petals. They entered one by one into prefixed positions. The desk had transformed instantaneously into a simple yet comprehensive workbench. Luo Nan took out a medical cooler from the bookshelf, placing the cooler on the table. Various raw drug materials were seen encapsulated inside upon opening the cooler. The white powder brought by ink was subjected to a series of tests and was added amongst the drug materials upon confirmation of its validity. All the materials he needed for this night of work were here at this point. All his instruments were ready, well, at least all those he could acquire and prepare. Luo Nan took a deep breath, having finished with preparations. He opened a hidden drawer to the side of the desk and took out an old-fashioned notebook. This notebook had a brown cover. It had the same design as the notebook he always carried with him. They were both loose-leaf notebooks. However, through wear and tear over countless years, a great amount of inked writing was affected. The brown leather notebook seemed to be somewhat separating, and there was even swelling on the outer skin. The insides also lacked a flexible e-ink screen. Luo Nan placed his own notebook to the side and opened the brown notebook very carefully. A properly hand-drawn diagram could be seen in the center of the very first page. It appeared to consist of several shapes from geometry class. There was a pyramid, or a more accurate description would be a tetrahedron, with an inscribed sphere and a circumscribed sphere. Together, they formed a completely flawless structure. There were hand-scrolled writings beneath this diagram. 4 flowing and linked clauses were written. My heart's a prison, my heart's a furnace. My heart calls for a lens, my heart calls for the nation. Luo Nan didn't dare state that he understood the true meaning of this diagram and its following words. But every time he flipped to this page and read these words attentively to himself, all the messy thoughts in his head would settle down, causing his heart and mind to naturally become clear and tranquil. Luo Nan stayed on this page for a few seconds, then he started flipping towards the back of the book. He was searching for relevant content and keywords for the drug synthesis preparation amongst the densely packed words and sentences. He was totally engrossed in the profound sentences and complicated molecular formulas. Reduction, substitution, simplification. Grandpa, come on and help me out. Time passed abruptly as he muttered to himself in a low voice. The lights outside the window had already gone out. And all this time in front of the workbench, Luo Nan's attention was focused back and forth between his notebook and his instruments for his experiment. He followed the data in his notebook, increasing doses of various raw drug materials. He only took a 2-hour nap during this time frame. He slept for approximately 2 hours during the slow reaction phase. It was 3:15 in the early morning when he added in the final drop of solution. The turbid liquid started to boil violently in the reaction receptacle. Its color began to slowly change as well. Luo Nan stared attentively at the transparent receptacle that seemed to be on the verge of exploding. He was confirming if the reaction was the one he wanted. It took 2 minutes before he stretched his somewhat stiff neck and began cleaning up the stuff on his lab bench. At the same time, he muttered some data for recording. Stock of dimethyltryptamine, 0, stock of cathinone, 0, stock of MMDA, 2 mmg, stock of cetalostat, 5 mmg. The self-operating notebook was spread out on the lab bench, and it followed his words. The opened flexible e-ink screen flickered and glimmered. The recorded tables on the interface automatically changed to the relevant data. The majority stock of drugs had already been depleted to 0, or they were rapidly approaching 0. Luo Nan cleaned up the waste, which consisted mainly of the packaged containers for these drugs. He took what could be reused, and he washed and sterilized them, and he gathered what could not be recycled. It took approximately half an hour for his small workbench to be restored back to its orderly and pristine state. The light green drug in the reaction receptacle had been cooling slowly after a period of boiling. Having reached this step, he could basically determine that his efforts of this night had not been wasted. Anyway, he had made a brief recording in his brown notebook. Q11R has displayed several instances of peripheral neuritis. Q27R has displayed allergic symptoms and is on the verge of death. No abnormalities are displayed in other test subjects. They possess substitute effects fundamentally, making it hard to determine side effects. Luo Nan shook his head, guessing that the time was still off. He swiped on the flexible screen and went to his often frequented Secret Star forums online. Even though it was very early in the morning, the night owls of the forum were still engaging in bustling debate and discussion. At the center of the contention was precisely the city Xie. The recent period of earthquakes in the city of Xie set off waves and waves in this discussion forum, which was full of those that slanted towards the study of mystics and mysteries. Many people were discussing the causes of the earthquakes, be it the geology structure, resonance in tectonic plates, a leak in pneuma. Any sort of fantastically odd topics were talked about. There were even those who solemnly swear that there had been a corporation running secret experiments in City Xie recently, that it was quite likely that the corporation was the source of the frequent earthquakes. Luo Nan did not have even an ounce of interest in these boring topics. He was only concerned about 2 points. 1. Will the earthquakes affect his experiments? 2. As the panic-stricken situation becomes more and more intense, wouldn't his aunt forcefully haul him home? Luo Nan inputted his customary user role password and was ready to log into the discussion boards in the forums. But a warning popped up on the website. You don't have sufficient privileges. Please submit an authentication request to the administrator. Luo Nan was dazed, then he smacked his forehead lightly. Yep, he had been shadow banned to the small black house. The justification for his ban was quite simple. All his posts on purchasing were thought to be bait from a police sting operation. This was a new rule set in the forums half a month ago after the police destroyed a multinational illegal drug internet deal. Talk of the rule was tightly concealed. Luo Nan was accidentally at the end of a smoking gun. It was no big deal to have his ID banned, but the annoying thing was having his drug distribution channel severed. Looking at his current stockpile of raw drug materials, soon he wouldn't be able to continue with his experiments even if Mrs. Luo Shuqing were to do nothing, and the majority of the 50 types of drugs he commonly used were all part of the regulated directory of psychotropic drugs. A minor would never be able to purchase them from a pharmacy. Could it be that he now needs to walk the black line? While it was true that this distribution channel of the Secret Star discussion forum was illegal, its supply chain history was actually quite reliable. Quite a lot of them were external transactions by factory owners. It could barely count as a business in regards to avoiding the strict regulation of psychotropic drugs. As for the black line, the quality of the test sample brought by Inc. today was acceptable, but trading goods on the black line was a very serious crime. Every part of it was closely linked to organized crime. To speak plainly, they're a bunch of drug traffickers. They are for tilde. When compared to dealing with drug traffickers, what was the big deal with entering the Mystic Arts Research Society as an unskilled worker? He was not hopeful of acquiring raw materials from the society, but rather of acquiring an advanced distribution channel. Then it would be worth it. Finally, the liquid inside the reaction receptacle stopped boiling, cooling off rapidly. Luo Nan collected his wandering thoughts on the spot. He opened a valve to allow the drug to flow into an already prepared needleless syringe. Then he immediately injected a large quantity of the psychotropic drug mixture into a vein in his arm. There wasn't even a trace of change in his expression from start to end. Next, Luo Nan finished cleaning his labware and instruments. Then he pressed down on a button, causing the black suitcase to return to its original state. Only then did he tear off his lab gloves and place his brown notebook super carefully in the hidden drawer. He hid the cooler inside the bookcase and went to the bathroom to wash up. It was exactly 4 o'clock. Luo Nan changed to a sports hat and tank top. He clasped the black notebook that had never left his side under his arm, walked out the front door, and started his strict morning run to adhere to his schedule. Chapter 2: A Major Problem. The majority of the city remained asleep in darkness, allowing for the neon street lights to embellish the city. The glowing haze of the city scattered towards the sky, reflecting a pattern of mist that overflowed with ominousness. The massive earthquakes had yet to stop. Luckily, the crows were experts at sleeping quietly on the tree tops, maintaining the proper quiet mornings. On top of a large tree near a high-rise apartment, Ink reacted and opened its eyes. It watched Luo Nan run by beneath the tree, then it closed its eyes and dozed off again. In the giant metropolis, that is the city of Xie, magnetic rails passed between skyscrapers and skyscrapers. Overhead walkways, green promenades, and moving walkways were linked coming and going. It was like being under the leafy spiraling vines of a dense forest. Luo Nan was like a tiny little bug that breathed in and swallowed the early morning dew. He trekked forward step by step in this forest. His lips were slightly closed. His throat, oral cavity, and nasal cavity were vibrating fully to create a sound. It sounded like the buzzing of the vibrating wings of a bug. Actually, Luo Nan was reciting the words, "My heart's a prison, my heart's a furnace. My heart calls for a lens, my heart calls for the nation," over and over. He was only able to produce this bizarre sound by linking the mere syllables, omitting the commas, and mixing it all with his breathing. Occasionally, there were other people who had woken up for a morning run. They would slip past his body, be puzzled from hearing his sound, and turn around to size him up. He concentrated on going forward all this time, maintaining his speed and tempo at a relatively smooth pace. After continuing to exercise for an hour, Luo Nan turned and stepped onto a moving walkway to cross the wide space between two skyscrapers. This was his pre-scheduled rest stop. Though he paused his exercise, he still continued to chant without end. His breathing could still be considered smooth. The long period of time he spent creating that resonating sound resulted in an oxygen-starved symptom. His inner skull was swelling faintly, but the counteracting spreading drug that was gradually accumulating in his system had yet to be effective. The drug he had injected before he left his home just started to exhibit its effects one by one with its composition of psychotropics. In reality, any ordinary person, even drug addicts of many years, would instantaneously have their nervous system in disorder and die within the shortest time frame upon intravenous injection of this dosage, which was composed of high-purity psychotropics. However, Luo Nan underwent constant adjustment of doses and composition to tolerate it, gradually injecting nearly 2,000 doses over the course of 5 or so years. Luo Nan's outer appearance was exactly no different from an ordinary person. Inside, the structure of his nervous system had already displayed subtle and deep changes. He was still alive. Furthermore, he could feel the serious changes to his body. A composition exceeding 20 different types of psychotropics broke through the membrane of his blood-brain barrier. The psychotropics, like over 20 incorporeal blades, aimed against different neuron targets and began to sculpt and modify the neurons. This kind of sculpting was bound to be rough and intense. The brain itself cannot feel pain. but under the influence of the drug, dopamine, norepinephrine, glutamic acid, neurotensin, and dozens of hundreds of other neurotransmitters were released by the brain like a tide of information. They acted on every layer of skin, every internal organ, and every nook and corner by means of neurotransmission. How indescribable was this type of feeling? Luo Nan also did not wish to describe it. All he could say was that it was much better than his very first appearance when his body had spasmed uncontrollably, when he had incontinence, and when he even had lung failure. Obviously, he would have to pay the price to have thousands of generations of change on the basic structure of his human body within a short handful of years. Luo Nan's mind had long since been calm. He closed his eyes and increased his concentration on his chanting and breathing. Luo Nan's grandfather had passed this chanting and breathing technique to him. Nominally, this technique was an aid to his drug sculpting. After all, how could a human's willpower control the changes that go on the cellular level? So Luo Nan continued to believe that the primary function of this technique was to maintain a concentrated mental state and activate the energy of his blood. Furthermore, it was a visualization technique that slanted towards the mystic arts. Luo Nan's eyes were closed as he matched the 20-word chant with the diagram. The tetrahedron, the inscribed sphere, and circumscribed sphere appeared clearly in his mind, revolving in the center. Each layer rotated before his very eyes. Luo Nan opened his eyes approximately 10 seconds later, taking a long breath. The visualized diagram revolved smoothly. Everything was going well. Luo Nan had traveled only half the distance on the moving walkway before he relaxed his consciousness. He sized up the city in this early morning. The nightclub street of the city Xie was not too far away. Many people say that the life of the city Xie doesn't completely awaken until midnight. The lingering aftertaste could be felt in the early morning. The sunny day, however, was just the period when the machinery was recharging. Under each lamp in this enormous and crowded metropolis, people were all set free to this playground of pleasure. The most flourishing nightclub area was a particular example of this. There were guys and girls under the neon lights right at this moment. They stumbled and staggered out from the nightclubs with messy clothes. Some people up front were a bit slow, and the back ones crashed into the front like cars. Sounds of people falling and rolling into a blob could be heard. It was like a wiggling fat worm that couldn't crawl its way up no matter how it tried. They didn't get angry. They just stayed there pushing and pulling against one another, laughing and giggling. Clearly, they had been partying all night long, exhausting all of their energy. Only the excess secreted dopamine continued to transmit between neurons. They engaged in wanton indulgence in this manner. It was as if they were saying, "Look, this is how the youth ought to live their life." Amidst the chaos, a luxurious flying car descended in autonomous mode, slid across the street, and parked to the side. Typical vertical doors opened elegantly. At last, there was a rather tall man who was able to struggle free and climb up from the squirming body of humans. He seemed to have kissed every woman in his surroundings within this time frame. While his companions were laughing and cursing, he grabbed the long leg of a nearby young woman and headed to the car, half dragging, half carrying her. The face of this man just happened to be illuminated clearly and distinctly by the bright neon lamps of the nightclub street. As it turned out, Luo Nan recognized this person. "Oh, it's him. I bet he would make a good subject." Luo Nan's heart stirred, and he observed the group of guys and girls more seriously. 30 seconds later, He brought out the never-leaving-his-side loose-leaf notebook, and he drew out an approximate sketch of the area at high speeds on a page of the flexible e-ink screen using a digital pen. The moving walkway had transporting Luo Nan for 75 seconds. He had several dozen seconds remaining, excluding the time that was consumed before. The lines had formed a crisscross mess of a sketch under Luo Nan's pen in this time frame. He lacked all intention of continuing, so he waited for the moving walkway to bring him to its end. Then he put away his pen, swept his gaze downward, and directly left. When he had turned his head, he actually saw that man who had triggered the idea of drawing. Somehow, the man had actually noticed his existence. The man just happened to raise his head to look blankly at him. The gazes of these two people intertwined and crossed through the void. Luo Nan was unperturbed. He continued chanting those unbroken syllables, which formed the sound of the vibrating wings of an insect, and he proceeded with his running exercise. The few distant noises that permeated over were naturally filtered out and discarded. Xie Junping felt that he was about to go crazy. His throat-tearing cries didn't bring about any sort of effect. The figure on the moving walkway still left without looking back. To the side, his party friends and friends with benefits were still giggling and laughing under the stimulating effects of chemical compounds. Juicy Longlegs of a moment ago, who was by every means pleasing to the eye, wrapped herself around his waist and giggled. She fumbled around, trying to undo his belt. Xie Junping really went crazy now. Get lost. He pushed away Juicy Longlegs by force. He rammed his way into the car and locked the car door without regards to the shouts of the crowd of trash outside. At this moment, his holofilm contact lenses, produced by the Quantum Corporation, were performing simple analysis on the data it had collected just now, mapping the result on his retina. The photo snatcher on the overhead walkway appeared as an instantaneous photoshoot picture, revealing a fuzzy, tilted face. Circled in red on the sports clothes was the Acumen College's crest, a plum blossom and bamboo pattern. Shortly later, the AI of his Phantom car also analyzed the data recorded automatically from its surrounding environment as part of its security system. Passes of analysis were sent back. This was much clearer than the picture that was taken in urgency. Luck had nothing to do with this result. When Xie Junping saw the hooded photo snatcher, drawing and writing in a notebook in its hands, he smashed down on the steering wheel with a fist. The flying car honked, causing the fool who was rapping against his window to fall backward in shock. Before the fool's butt could hit the ground, the flying car had started up in a flash and took off with a whistle. He was sane, he was sane. Xie Junping smacked his own head ruthlessly. If this was a different time period, it wouldn't be a problem no matter what problems arise in the private life of a well-connected son of a wealthy family. But nowadays, the situation was different. He should be in the bordering city Mangzhong, as he was responsible for a disaster relief humanitarian aid operation, according to his society. True, last night he was really at Mangzhong, but he had snuck out of his team for the sake of joining this crazy party. He had snuck out and drove his car for several hundred kilometers to rush back to Xie City. His original plan was to return immediately back when the party ended. But who could have expected that he would be caught red-handed by a student from his school? Right now, he was striving for the senior medal of the Honor Society, and he wanted to try going one step further in the student council. It was the key period of time for him to establish a position in the circle. He was going for the general election. Lying, destroying trust, and hypocrisy would all admittedly be necessary qualities asked of a standard politician. But if the politician were to be exposed, then it would simply be fatal. A fatal stupidity. What's more was the continuous earthquakes happening in Xie City at the present. The populace was in a state of alarm. Everyone's mental tolerance was on the decline. Things that wouldn't be a problem normally would become problems now. The small problems in the past would become major problems today. Yep, major problems would appear. The car's telephone rang. The one calling was the party friend from just then. Xie Junping had walked away too hastily. He had neglected to handle many things. He picked up at once, and the indistinct and fuzzy voice of Lion Yu scolded through foremost. "Xie Junping, you bastard!" A strange laughter was coming from his party friend as background noise. Xie Junping closed his eyes. Yep, he had actually forgotten about Lion Yu. She was the slut who wanted to undo his belt just then. Actually, she already had a master. Her real boyfriend was also a member of the same honor society. "Give me control." Xie Junping pounded the steering wheel heavily again. His strength was strong enough for the car's AI to give him a warning. But after he vented this time, he finally recovered somewhat of a clear head from his hangover and confusion. Calm need to be calm. As long as the evidence wasn't immediately uploaded to the internet, exposing him, there would always be a chance to retrieve the evidence. He strived to keep his manner of speaking calmly as he spoke in a low voice. "Lion Yu, go wash up. I have something I need to talk to you about." Lion Yu spoke still drunk. "Xie Junping, you son of a. Go wash up, now," Xie Junping roared loudly. He shattered the car's phone call in hate. The rage of the emperor leaves 1,000,000 corpses. The rage of a warrior leaves blood flowing for 5 paces. However, the other side merely hung up the phone. Xie Junping could only rage as an ordinary person and slam his head towards the ground. His head slammed against the steering wheel. Xie Junping forced himself to calm down. Actually, he knew himself quite well. He knew that he was pretty much an ordinary person. His intelligence and abilities were so-so. He was at most able to have some level of social connections because of precisely his family background network working behind the scenes. But he was able to reach this expert cloud-reaching stage at Acumen College. How was he able to make it here to this very day? He acted as a quality boss. He took professional matters and gave them over to professionals to handle, offering them appropriate remuneration. He relied on professionals. Xie Junping slammed against the steering wheel again. He was entwined damned complicatedly with this woman Lion Yu. Aside from playing around with men, what sort of professional achievements had she displayed? His thought process cleared up quickly. He immediately threw Lion Yu into the back of his mind and dialed a different number. The idle ringback tone was a tender female voice. "Hello, Hidden Indigo's business office is at your service. Our working hours are weekdays before 9 o'clock and after 17:00. As for holidays and vacations, the cost of services will be calculated as overtime. You are hereby informed. Thank you for your cooperation." Xie Junping rolled his eyes. A short time later, the pre-recorded voice changed completely to the sound of a completely different clear, bright, and energetic voice. "Long time no see. Hello, sucker." Xie Junping was overpowered by this name-calling in an instant. He wanted to refute her but lacked the confidence. All he could do was speak through gritted teeth. "This must be Ying. Good morning. Boss Wu's not there." "Eh, you really want to see the boss?" "No. Having you is fine. Having you is fine. Xie Junping slapped his head ruthlessly. Today he really drank himself retarded to be angry with this crazy lass. That's right, Tilda, any matter you tell me would be the same as telling the boss. Anyway, it doesn't matter who it is, you're still going to be ripped off, he. Xie Junping wanted to eat the car's computer, but now was not the time to be bothered. He could only go straight to the point. Today I brought some trouble upon myself. I need your help to handle this. He described what had happened earlier with the greatest speed. At the same time, he sent over the recording he had snatched to provide them with further analysis. Wying soon replied, "A photo snatcher, should I admire your empty skull for a moment? It's not a snatched photo. The one standing on the moving walkway. Wasn't he waiting for you to come out of the nightclub, and then he took a picture?" Hick, Xie Junping's voice was jammed instantly. Even though he was criticized very harshly, there was no need to doubt the professionalism of Hidden Blue. Approximately half a minute later, Wying sent over a set of geographic coordinates. "We should first perform a verification, regardless of anything else, without taking complicated factors in consideration. If this person was merely passing by, he should be the type that does early morning runs. Also, since today's not a holiday, the end of his run should be at Acumen College. Go here to wait and see." Xie Junping felt that the logic was sound. He immediately turned the flying car and entered into another magnetic rail to increase his speed. He drove the car and arrived at the destination indicated by Wying approximately 5 minutes later. This was a pedestrian overpass located in the high-tech R&D district. It was a very good area. It was also one of the main nodes that led to the college. Early morning jogger enthusiasts found it hard to refuse this route. The flying car parked at the northernmost end of the bridge. What followed was waiting. Xie Junping found it hard to be at ease and not be fretful. A formatted chart appeared on his retina at the moment. This was the profile of an individual pulled from Acumen College's database. The electronic image displayed a youngster who appeared very calm and reserved. He could be considered handsome with that smile-lacking face. Chapter 3, Notebook. This is your said photo snatcher. Ying provided a short analysis of the data. Luo Nan, 16 years old, entered Acumen College this year on September 1st. His admissions scores were average. Teacher assessments from elementary school to middle school don't mention anything notable. He's very ordinary. Xie Junping only cared for a certain point, so he's not really the paparazzi type. Ying didn't respond directly. She continued, analyzing the data. What's relatively noteworthy is that his aunt is written as his guardian on the form. As for his parents, let me look that up. His mother passed away due to a difficult birth. His father had gone missing long ago. How strange. There's still difficult births in this day and age. Do you mean that? The circumstances he grew up in is relatively unusual. There should be some eccentricities to his character. We need to observe further. Release your vehicle access privileges right now and turn on the surveillance system. I want to observe with you. Xie Junping immediately followed her instructions. Shortly after, he synchronized the data with Ying. Luo Nan's steady jogging figure appeared on the sloped top of the overpass. Right now, the sky was only in twilight. The distant figure was completely blurry. Fortunately, the flying car Phantom's surveillance system had gone through special customization to possess stronger detection and anti-detection capabilities. It was due to the automatic warning of the car's AI that Xie Junping was able to discover that his photo was snatched. Xie Junping observed the photo snatcher's every movement through the surveillance system, but he was unable to make out anything. Actually, Zhang Yingying had already reached an initial verdict on her side. Congrats to you, sucker. I can basically conclude that he did not target you specifically. Do you hear the sound of his breathing? From 50 meters away, the muttering of the target could be recovered through the surveillance system's powerful acoustic gathering and filtering capabilities. The sound of the morning runner's breathing was no exception to this. Hick, that buzzing is his breathing. Isn't it like the sound of a bee? It should be a special breathing technique, and there's also a special chant. The specific effects are unclear. Maybe there isn't an effect at all. His lung capacity is only slightly better than that of an ordinary person. But he's in a state of extreme concentration. Look at his expression with that bright glow. Tusk, tusk. Would one who harbors the malicious thoughts of snatching a picture really put forth the effort into exercising after doing so? Xie Junping's anxious mood finally received relief. A smile was unconsciously revealed on his face. But right at this moment, when Luo Nan made his way down the highest point of the overpass, Luo Nan's gaze suddenly deviated. Looking at the image cast by the surveillance system, Luo Nan was looking directly at Xie Junping. The screen was unidirectional. Those outside the car can't see inside, but Xie Junping was still given a scare. Did he discover us? Your phantom is way too eye-catching, and furthermore, he's way keener than I imagined. Yingying seemed to become interested. He must have sensed something. However, it doesn't seem like his expression has changed. He's not the type to wear his heart on his sleeve. This type of person has many thoughts running in their head. They're the type to have schemes. But for him to be able to maintain his concentration means that his willpower is higher than normal. Oh, right. Speaking of willpower, I just found something very interesting. Do you want to hear? Xie Junping watched Luo Nan move closer step by step. He was currently in a mess trying to figure out what to do. How could he have the mood to leisurely listen? However, Yingying didn't give a damn about Xie Junping. She spoke, minding her own business. According to his school profile, Luo Nan's household address is located in the River Wu district of the Blue Bay community. The straight-line distance between Acumen College and his house is nearly 40 kilometers. Obviously, this isn't a long distance if he rides the underground public transit, the metro, and so on, but he ran over here. That's a marathon a day. Using his lung capacity, breathing technique, and muscle composition as a basis for analysis, each run is tantamount to peeling a layer of skin. If he runs like this every day, oh dear, that's quite the self-flagellation. Crap, merely thinking those thoughts caused Xie Junping to feel his scalp go numb. Yingying continued with her analysis. From his aforementioned circumstances, I've determined that he shouldn't be the impulsive type, generally speaking. He won't make rash decisions in a situation of unknown circumstances. But if you give him a bad impression, or if you make him feel threatened, the consequences are hard to predict. Well, get out of the car now. What? You didn't think you came here to just watch him run, did you? Please. Wouldn't that show that you fancy him? Get out of the car now and make conversation with him. Don't you always brag that you're an expert socializer? Or do you only have the characteristics of being a sucker? He knew clearly she was goading him, but there isn't a guy anywhere who would slap his own face in front of a girl. Xie Junping took a deep breath. and patted his face to sober up a bit more from his hungover and murky state. Only then did he open the vertical doors of his phantom and step outside. This time he was standing face to face with Luo Nan for reals. The distance between the two was approximately 40 meters. Xie Junping brought forth the elegant demeanor of running for the student council. He waved towards Luo Nan from far away, sending him a greeting. Yingying's rang through the internal earbuds, seemingly ringing from the depths of his mind. "Excellent, you look just like a dog. Pay attention. Don't give off a stinking air of pretension. Your current appearance is of a shameless degenerate, but you're still considered a straightforward playboy. Also, you need to be a bit more forthright. He's way smarter than you imagine." It was as if Xie Junping had returned to the time when he was running for student council. He followed every step planned by his advisor and operated according to the image he would present to voters. Luckily, Yingying's request wasn't that difficult. It seemed that this performance came naturally to him. He saw Luo Nan slow down in front of him and stared directly over to him. It was unclear if Luo Nan's expression had changed. He lacked the visible intention of responding. This made Luo Nan quite hard to pin down. Xie Junping decided to take the offensive initiative. He moved forward a few steps. "Apologies to this schoolmate, I wish to have a chat with you." Only when the distance between the two was within 10 meters did Luo Nan tilt his head in greeting. "Senior Xie." Xie Junping's heart skipped a beat. He asked by reflex, "You recognize me?" Yingying's resentful voice sounded out, "What are you panicking for?" Luo Nan answered at practically the same time. "The 24th. You've participated in the Senior Run Society promotion and advice convention." "Oh, that's right. That really did happen." Xie Junping scolded himself internally for the bad response. He started the conversation over with Luo Nan by asking a question he already knew the answer to. "How should I address this junior?" Luo Nan's. "Okay then, Junior Luo Nan. I'm terribly sorry for disturbing your morning run, but there's something I need your help with." "Yes." The awkward moment just then. "I can't be out in public at the moment. Can we talk in the car?" Yingying spoke in a soft, patronizing voice. You wield that self-deprecating tone quite well. Luo Nan thought about it and didn't refuse. Luo Nan squeezed into the car and sat shotgun. He placed the notebook on his knee and sat upright, giving the appearance of a well-behaved, law-abiding student. Seeing how Luo Nan was quite cooperative, Xie Junping let out a breath of relief and returned sitting in the car. He followed Yingying's instructions and allowed the door to remain open, avoiding the mental implications created by a confined, empty space. He even pulled out a performance drink from the mini fridge from the back seat and handed the drink over. "Replenish yourself with some water." "Thanks, Senior Xie." Luo Nan's displayed distant manners from the very beginning. He took the drink, but he didn't open the can. Yingying raised some additional points. "Retard. Stop beating around the bush. This type of person is quick thinking. Many thoughts run through his head. It would be troublesome if you make a mistake. You need to pay attention. You were too vague just then. What awkward incident? Directly say the time and place." Xie Junping immediately cut to the chase. "Junior, forgive me for being presumptuous. I wish to ask if you were at the Dongxing Twin Towers moving walkway approximately 10 minutes ago at around 5 o'clock. Luo Nan held the cold drink in his hand as he responded simply with, "Yes, Senior." "Hick, you saw me come out of the nightclub." "I saw." Xie Junping smacked his forehead and put on an extremely vexed expression. 5 minutes were spent inside the car acting, 3 minutes venting, and 2 minutes waiting for Yingying's instructions. Yingying did not disappoint him, delivering him instructions very quickly. He isn't deliberately taking the initiative. He responds whenever you ask him a question. It's highly probable that he lacks some social abilities. He may not be inexperienced from what he's exhibited so far. He should put more of a value on a person's image. This type of person will likely be fine being persuaded, but not coerced. However, you also shouldn't straightforwardly talk about money. Xie Junping understood in a second. He forced a laugh on the spot. Junior tilde this senior has truly lost face today. I don't have any sort of excuses for this matter that happened, but right now we're in unusual times. He pointed out the matter of him wishing to get the Honor Society's senior medal. Then he clasped his hand together, faced Luo Nan, and acted out paying his respects. He spoke half exaggerated and half seriously. I know no matter how I say it, it may not seem authentic, but Junior, can you turn a blind eye to this? Can you let me off this time? Reputation and the like really doesn't mean much to me. But as far as I'm concerned, that medal is very, very important. The performance that Xie Junping put on this time was absolutely top-notch. His attitude was very self-deprecating. The vulgar gangster smile of a plebe was on his face. His brazenness was protruding, and the smile also dispelled some of the seriousness of the situation. He was refraining from rousing Luo Nan's greed, for that would lead to bigger problems. Luo Nan remained unperturbed from beginning to end. Senior, you don't need to act this way. I'm no gossip, and even more so, I don't talk behind people's backs. Hick, I trust my junior. But in the information age with videos, photos, and the like, it's not really safe. I didn't take a photo. I just felt that scene was relatively special, so I drew a rough sketch as a souvenir. Luo Nan opened his notebook as he spoke. The flexible e-ink screen lit up to let Xie Junping take a look at the work he had drawn. Xie Junping was slightly relieved when he saw the vague lines and shadows. Right before Xie Junping was about to speak, Yingying spoke suddenly. Get the notebook into your possession. She had spoken too fast. Xie Junping thought he heard her say snatch. He had a cold sweat from fright on the spot. Xie Junping was stunned for 2 seconds before he could find a pretext. Junior, you've carried this notebook for the whole day. It looks quite inconvenient to do so. What special function does it have? Xie Junping had spoken the truth. Luo Nan's loose-leaf notebook combined the flexible screen with conventional paper binding into a single form factor. It appeared that having a flexible screen would cause traditional pages to not be very useful. And if one were to use traditional pages instead, a flexible screen would also be superfluous. He reached out his hand as he spoke, adopting a curious, investigating appearance. In truth, his heart was somewhat shaking with fear that Luo Nan would get angry and bring forth another mess. Luo Nan was actually quite magnanimous. He handed over the loose-leaf notebook to Xie Junping's hands. This kind of notebook was very popular during the Third War. Charging facilities weren't everywhere in the chaos of war or in the desolate countryside. It was quite easy for electronic goods to turn into garbage. Traditional paper products were more reliable than electronic products at the time. Also, the efficiency can be rapidly increased when manufacturing is abundant. The flexible screen can be swapped out at any time. Its manufacturing costs aren't high. Whoa, a product from the Third War era. Have they produced any in the past dozen of years? This brought a smile to Luo Nan's face causing his facial contours to be softer. My grandfather loved these types of notebooks the most back in the day. He had bought over 1,000 books in one fell sweep. This one I'm using is amongst those. And my grandfather wrote in at least hundreds of similar notebooks. Each book was packed to the brim, but now I'm unable to see the majority of them. Wow, so it's an antique. Xie Junping flipped the pages at random and saw that the majority of the space was white. Only parts of the pages were written with formulas, numbers, and simple diagrams. It was like they were written down in passing, and Xie Junping couldn't see through the history behind them. Xie Junping's attention was primarily on the flexible screen. The drawing software was still running, so he swiped with his finger, switching through page after page. He blurted out asking, "Is this flexible screen also from 50 years ago? I'm not quite familiar with this drawing software." "No, I installed it later on." Xie Junping didn't need Yingying's reminder to hear the sign that Luo Nan had changed what he was going to say. Anyway, he soon became interested in a drawing. Xie Junping looked in browser mode and saw many images with similar scenes to the one he was in. There were scenes from inside the school and outside the school. Xie Junping was somewhat stunned. He had some basic level of appreciation from being a second-generation rich folk, having received a good education. Although every single one of these sketches was sloppy, some even lacking any sort of background, Xie Junping was familiar with these places. From the contour lines of humanoid figures of the sketch on the crooked paper, he could clearly see what sort of places, circumstances, and people were described in the end. The last sentence was too exaggerated. What he meant was that he could see what was happening in these drawings. He could see the intense body language and expressions from lines that contoured and portrayed the human figures. Speaking of which, it was quite incredible. From the picture, concentration could be seen. Excitement could be seen. Depression could be seen. Madness could be seen. Those rough lines of the image could portray the atmosphere of the scene, could portray the mood of the crowd. It could even portray everyone's bearings. Luo Nan had used a digital pen to draw out the lines, but clearly there was a sort of sharp feeling of the image tearing out of the surface, stabbing deeply into one's hidden heart, indicating that part of it was real. Xie Junping sweated inexplicably from looking. Crap, did I discover the next Picasso? He flipped to the last page and saw the sketch where he was the main subject. Xie Junping was actually somewhat dazzled, all the way until Yingying's voice woke him up. He was clearly more excited than normal when he was talking about his notebook and his grandfather. "I was researching some data just now, and I discovered something very interesting. Retard. Flip ahead a few more pages. You were idle for too long. Take care that he doesn't misunderstand." "It's because I was talking to you." Xie Junping scolded Yingying over 100 times in his heart, but he still followed her instructions like a marionette. Yingying's voice continued to come over. "His grandfather's name is Luo Yuandao. He was formerly a researcher. He didn't have any noteworthy achievements, but at 83 years, aka 13 years ago, he was accused of something. It's said that a short time after the Third War, he went to the wilderness, and with cooperation from vagrant forces, he performed private live human experimentation." My God! Xie Junpei's finger, which was swiping on the screen, shivered. He felt Luo Nan's gaze constantly looking at him. Maybe this feeling was from his guilty conscience. However, it wasn't an appropriate time to talk right now. The only thing he could do was force himself to continue on. Chapter 4, A Sudden Turn. Obviously the words, live human experimentation, weren't good. But the word, vagrant, had another lexical property to it in the present era. The Third World War erupted in the year 2044. 70% of human-occupied areas were destroyed in a short 5 years. The damage was so bad 50 years later that the entire population of 10 billion people was squeezed and confined inside 88 enormous-scale metropolises to live crowded and cramped. It took until the last 10 years for conditions to come around for the better. Outside the metropolises was the wilderness. The wilderness was vast and empty. The land was warped to ruin by the nuclear radiation, such that nothing was recognizable. It was a place completely unsuited for humans to survive. But there were a group of people who refused to live in modern civilization, or perhaps they were extremists, fugitives, megalomaniacs exiled from human society. They made a bold gamble with their lives to wander about in the wilderness. Together they formed the concept of vagrant. The rule of the jungle was devoid of all humanity. There were no rules. Related vocabulary words bounced around one by one in Xie Junping's brain. He instantly formed a standard framework of Luo Nan's grandfather, who he had never met before. Evil mad scientist, the sort that'd been popping up more and more in superhero movies. Luo Yuandao and his son had a falling out due to this matter. His son Luo Zhengheng, who's also Luo Nan's father, suddenly left home and went missing. There's no news of Luo Zhengheng to this day. Luo Yuandao suffered from a serious case of a mental breakdown and was hospitalized for a long time. His condition had worsened recently. He won't be able to live for more than a few days. Xie Junping had a toothache listening to all this. He didn't care about all this. He was just worried about Luo Nan. Luo Nan, by all means, must not have inherited any sort of bad characteristics or have a warped character, and so on from growing up in these circumstances. This time, Yingying's tone had actually shifted. Anyway, this isn't even the most fascinating thing. Luo Yuandao was unknown in his generation, aside from that accusation of live human experimentation. But he's related to someone else who's actually renowned, Yan Hong. You should know of him. Xie Junping nodded his head by reflex. Of course he knew of Yan Hong. Yan Hong was a famous professor of Acumen College years ago. He was world-renowned, but he had lost his reputation from an issue with academic misconduct. He faded away from mainstream society. It was quite a hand-wringing situation. Yan Hong's archetype nerve formatting study paper paved the way for the emergence of burners. The results were revolutionary without a doubt. It's impossible to overestimate its significance. I used to be quite an admirer. No trace of adoration could be heard from Yingying's voice. There was only excitement. The problem is the issue of academic misconduct when he was 90. Someone exposed his results using Luo Yuandao's unpublished first-hand data. That's right. The data came from those who performed live human experimentation in the wilderness. Your circle is quite screwed up. Your sister, I'm not part of the academic circle. Xie Junping silently cursed again, but Yingying stopped gossiping. She stuck closer to real analysis. Luo Yuandao's incident happened when he was 83. Luo Nan was only 3 years old at the time. The influence of his grandfather's scandal and his missing father certainly pierced through his childhood years. How could a child understand all of this? What sort of character would be manifested? We can see it right now. His manner of speaking is relatively gentle. His behavior is very virtuous, simply like the model example of morality. Without taking into account the issue that this may be an act, we can filter out two possibilities. One is that he's compensating by being virtuous. He feels shame and guilt for the actions conducted by his grandfather. He subconsciously holds himself to a very high standard of virtue, cutting out everything bad. But Yingying immediately followed with a rejection. Of course, if this was the case, Luo Nan wouldn't have talked non-stop about his grandfather's notebook. There's also likely some issue with the history of that flexible screen. What's he clearly avoiding? Yingying stopped explaining further. She directly jumped to the second possibility. The other possibility is that he's being virtuous for a mission. If his grandfather possessed some sort of charisma, or maybe he didn't care for any preconceived notions, the event of 90 years that disrupted the academic circle must have given Luo Nan a sort of assumption or fantasy towards the achievements of his grandfather. After all, it was sufficient enough to exert to topple Yan Hong. Xie Junping couldn't help raising his head and looking towards Luo Nan. Yingying's description was synchronized. Her voice had the same cadence as reciting a poem. Perhaps his grandfather had suffered an injustice. Perhaps the burning should have been his grandfather's achievement. That old fellow in the mental ward who is on the verge of dying is actually a great person misunderstood and unacknowledged by the world. Luo Nan's bound to have a feeling of solidarity with these thoughts, molding a sense of having the world against him, a sense of a mission. So he's reserved, antisocial, resolute, and vigilant. Just like an anti-hero, he has the staunch resolution to charge alone against the world's dark plots. Wow, even I'm moved. The corner of Xie Junping's mouth was twitching from hearing this. That person Luo Nan was still in front of him. Why was the person behind him sounding more and more like she's writing a screenplay? Nevertheless, youths that were 15 to 16 years old like Luo Nan were at a period of life when they're filled with heroic fantasies. Looking at his utterly serious appearance, could it be that Luo Nan's thought process was truly what Yingying says it is? Senior Xie, Luo Nan asked a sentence which may have been a warning. Xie Junping only just discovered that he had lost his manners in front of Luo Nan while being concentrated on listening to Yingying's screenplay. What if he really gets misunderstood? That would spell the death of him. He hurriedly returned the notebook back to Luo Nan and naturally glossed things over by commenting, "These drawings are quite decent." When these words left his mouth, Xie Junping felt dried and stiff. He could not face what followed. "These don't count as drawings, they're mere sketches." Luo Nan maintained his politeness, but after he took back the notebook, he politely bid farewell. "If Senior has no other matters, then I'm going to go." Xie Junping's blank expression was like a work of art. Luo Nan faced him with a nod, placed the performance drink on the center console, and simply got out of the car. He was clearly being doubted. Xie Junping's mind was really empty. He hurriedly asked Yingying a question. "Hey, don't I need to say something?" "So it turns out all my saliva has been wasted." Yingying's words contained hateful resentment. "You." The noise transmitting to his ear suddenly turned quiet. Yingying's voice turned fuzzy and indistinct. "Hello, hello. TSZZZZZ. TSZZZZZ. To hell with it, there's a situation now." Xie Junping sweated instantaneously. He saw the Luo Nan had already walked quite the distance. He had to do something, so he rushed out of the car and shouted, "Junior, I'll send you off." Luo Nan turned his head and responded, "It's fine if I just run. Wouldn't Senior be inconvenienced? Heck. That's true, Xie Junping was embarrassed. Right now it would be disastrous if he was seen in public. He should retreat back to Mangzhong without delay. The key thing was to snip the situation in the bud. He actually needed Luo Nan to remind him of this. He had been struck dumb to a certain level. Embarrassed as he was, he could only follow his usual habits to try to pull him closer. Then, let me arrange a dinner as thanks later. I'll find a place and notify you within 2 days. Xie Junping walked over upon speaking, intending to exchange numbers, and Luo Nan actually didn't refuse. The two touched their wristbands together, and the exchange was successful. They even shook each other's hand in passing. Right when Xie Junping was mulling over further words to say, the area to the side suddenly lit up, causing him to instinctively turn his head. All he saw was an azure arc of lightning jump across. At first glance, it appeared to be lightning, but it clearly was striking from the ground towards the sky. It pierced between the layers of clouds. The surrounding electric-lit buildings appeared to warp and distort, perhaps due to the arc of light being way too strong. And at practically the same time, his flying car Phantom emitted an alarm. What's going on? Xie Junping turned around and he walked over towards his flying car. But he was only able to take a few steps before his internal earbuds suddenly rang with an ear-piercing screech. He shouted loudly. He reflexively went to cover his ears, but before his hands could grasp his ears, another pain was felt in his eyes. The holofilm contact lens's temperature increased suddenly. The holofilm sensed that something was strange, activating its auto-cutoff mechanism. All functionality was shut off. Xie Junping's sight was blurred and his head was spinning. This was no illusion, but rather a vivid shaking, surging, and warping. The solid ground beneath his feet instantly turned into a rocking junk boat on turbulent waves. He could see skyscrapers and giant bridges warping and deforming within his field of vision. Fiery stars could be seen floating and swaying in the distance, shining red on the unlit sky. Earthquake, major earthquake. Xie Junping had only this thought flicker for a moment in his mind, but the ground went empty before he could completely come to. His entire body dropped downwards, and falling with him at the end of the bridge was the railing, rocks, and his Phantom flying car worth 500 million. The bridge collapsed. This bridge, known to be able to withstand a magnitude 9 earthquake, was like a bunch of toy building blocks being kicked over. Half of the end of the bridge suddenly crumpled. Xie Junping's mind was just a sea of whiteness. He instinctively shrieked, his pair of hands clawing wildly, wishing to grab onto something for support. He even grabbed onto something hard, some rubble that had fallen down with him. His hand grasped this toy. This had no significance whatsoever besides adding to his mass. Xie Junping's eyeballs were on the verge of bulging out. Then his vision spun rapidly. Lord! The miserable screech had just started when a stabbing pain was felt in the shoulder joint, then his wrist. A great force pierced through his entire body. The direction he was falling seemed to have spun around in a flash. His entire body was swinging violently. Xie Junping screeched at the top of his lungs. He screamed violently at a high pitch, and he cried out in tears. The falling bridge had already slammed into the lower levels of buildings at this time, ringing out with muffled explosions. Smoke and dust rose up. There was also the alarmed screams of pedestrians. The situation had turned extremely chaotic. "Shut up!" A muffled voice pierced through the rumbling noise and entered his ear. Xie Junping screamed 2 more times by reflex before he suddenly came to, violently shuddering. He raised his head and saw Luo Nan's face and half a chest sticking out from the top of the bridge. Of course, Luo Nan's arm that was reaching out with the utmost effort was the most important. It was scrawny, not thick at all. Yet that arm had firmly snatched him away from under the scythe of the Grim Reaper. Hick. That arm was still wrestling with death. It was unknown whether Xie Junping's luck was enough. The shock the overpass received was extraordinary. Although the bridge has been seriously warped, only the edge-end area of the bridge had fractured. Xie Junping just happened to be confined to that area. Luo Nan, who was only 5 steps away from him, had come out unscathed. But Luo Nan was only able to rush forward and fish Xie Junping's arm because things were precisely this way. Luo Nan didn't let Xie Junping fall and turn into meat paste. The situation was still unresolved. Luo Nan gripped Xie Junping firmly, but clearly Luo Nan's strength was not enough. It would be difficult for Luo Nan to exert the strength to drag Xie Junping up. The slope formed from the collapse of the end of the bridge was the most frightening. The angle was small, but Luo Nan was actually slowly sliding down under these circumstances. There wasn't anything to be seen in their surroundings that could lend them strength. The possibility of dying left a bitter taste in his mouth. Xie Junping tried his best to find something to grab onto, but his hand was struggling free, making Luo Nan hook onto the knuckles of his hand. Their hands were dangerously sliding apart. Xie Junping saw that his body was moving downwards, scaring him into screaming and squirming. Luo Nan had a very ugly expression on his face. He opened his mouth strained. "Don't move, grab my hand." Xie Junping was scared of his wits. How could he take in what he was hearing? He continued to squirm. "Do you want to die?" A roar pierced his ears, causing him to violently shudder. Xie Junping looked up and just happened to see Luo Nan's eyes. Yingying had said that Luo Nan's eyes glowed with light, while Luo Nan was exercising. But from this distance, Xie Junping saw that Luo Nan's irises weren't clear. They were thick and shot with blood. There were some traces of a green-yellow mottled color, but this mottled coloration seemed to have formed an otherworldly and bewitching sight that deeply penetrated into Xie Junping's mind. Xie Junping was unable to describe what it was, but his heart had tensed up inexplicably. His entire body was frozen. Luo Nan had spent a lot of energy roaring. This time his voice was quieter. It was also somewhat raspy. "Look at your hand. What the hell is it doing?" Xie Junping turned his gaze to look and saw that his right hand, the one that Luo Nan was firmly grabbing onto, was curled, fixed into a fist. It was stiff, like a hard piece of wood. He was tightly gripping a rock that had fallen down with him in the palm of his hand. The sharp edges stabbed into his palm, causing blood to flow. He didn't know all this time. This was likely due to psychological stress. It was so much that he even lost all sense of pain. The rock and his bloody flesh seemed to be fused together. Hopefully, they weren't bound together. "Let go," ordered Luo Nan. Xie Junpei wanted to let go, but his normally agile hand was completely dead frozen, making him sweat freely with urgency. He completely ignored the orders. I won't let go. I absolutely won't let go." Luo Nan took a deep breath and glared fixed at Xie Junping. "Don't look at your hand. Look at my eyes." Right now Luo Nan was the only one who shouldn't loosen his hand, so Xie Junping listened obediently. Xie Junping acted like a marionette. He did whatever Luo Nan said. Xie Junping looked once more into Luo Nan's eyes. Those eyes were like a turbid vortex with their mottled coloration. His attention was firmly locked onto those eyes. Next, Luo Nan's voice exploded directly within the depths of his mind. Let go. Xie Junping had only relaxed a single knuckle when he felt all the strength in his body be drained in a flash. His fingers loosened. The blood-covered rock fell straight down and smashed on his shoulder before falling off to the distance. The pain woke Xie Junping. He felt his body go soft and heavy. He reflexively grabbed out with his hand amidst his own screams. This time, his hand hooked onto Luo Nan's hand successfully. This time, he wouldn't let go. With Xie Junping's hand sharing the load, Luo Nan was able to adjust his hand position, at last, to be able to properly exert force. The taut situation was softened by this adjustment. Xie Junping's blood-congested skull started to recover soberness. The element of feeling returned a little more to his body. The cold morning wind blew over, causing his body to sway. Noise was also amidst the wind, and amidst the wind were the sounds of explosions. Some buildings had collapsed, causing rumbling sounds. There was also the sharp sound of sirens. One didn't need eyes to be able to understand all the chaos that was going on in the surroundings. He had heartfelt thanks towards this anti-hero. Right now Xie Junping was completely convinced of Yingying's analysis. Otherwise, he would have certainly turned into a puddle of mincemeat among the rubble. But he wished even more for this anti-hero to be able to produce more strength, to pull him up. Then an inexplicable strong explosion came right when he opened his mouth. Chapter 5: Formatting Theory. The noise's volume was simply unfathomable. The sound waves clumped together and smashed fiercely on their eardrums like the fists of a boxing champion. It was as if a ferocious beast had opened its bloody mouth wide to its cheeks and howled in rage. Xie Junping swore that he had never heard such a fearsome sound in his life. The seismic wave permeated through his entire body, causing his eyes to bulge out. All his internal organs with rolling, jittering, and shaking. Amidst his stupor, he felt that the husk of his skin and flesh was like a penetrated water sack that could fall apart at any time. This feeling of unprecedented fear was like a storm that swept through his mind. It washed his entire body from the inside out and took all the details out for him to see incomparably clearly. Xie Junping didn't know how this feeling came about. His mental defenses had collapsed, and he couldn't hold back from screaming yet again. Though this time, there was no one to stop him. Xie Junping screamed for an unknown amount of time. He only stopped when he exhausted all his emotions and energy down to zerk. Only then did he discover that he was still hanging in the air. His situation had not gotten better nor worse. The vibrational assault came and went suddenly. A cold wind blew before him, but Xie Junping had already fainted from exhaustion. Only his fingers remained striving to grasp Luo Nan's wrist. All sense of feeling was indistinct amidst his trembling. It was as if he had fallen entirely into a nightmare. Most fearsome of all was the state of the person who decides his fate, Luo Nan. Luo Nan was lying face down, with an ugly expression on his face. His eyes maintained an extremely cool-headed and resolute gaze to them. He refused to let them go out of focus. His hand's palm was dripping wet and also appeared to be shaking. Xie Junping was on the verge of crying for reals. Hey, it's no problem for you, right? Luo Nan didn't respond, instead closing his eyes. Sweat slipped out from the distant edges and dripped down. Xie Junping finally confirmed that Luo Nan's present state was extremely bad. it would be hard for him to make additional actions. He would die a violent death if things continued this way. It's all that damned. Wait, what had happened? An explosion? Xie Junping could not figure out what the cause of the violent shock and impact was. He also didn't have the time to think about this. He forced himself to raise his voice. Stay firm, stay firm. I'll sound an SOS ASAP. Luo Nan's eyes trembled, then opened with great difficulty. Luo Nan swept a look at Xie Junping and squeezed out a few words through gritted teeth. Look at your car. Let's focus first on. Look down. Xie Junping hesitated for a moment. Finally, he fought against his dizziness and fears, his eyeballs rotating down. Then he saw the silhouette of his phantom in all its magnificent glory, located diagonally 10 meters down from him. The flying car Phantom, valued at 500 million, held an extraordinary standing. Aside from having capabilities of an ordinary flying car, it could also speed up on the magnetic rail's superconductive roadway. And it even has an air suspension braking mechanism in case of emergencies. So the Phantom didn't just fall to the ground and smash into pieces when it fell off the overpass. Instead, it had automatically activated its suspension mechanism. It rose up slowly, searching for a magnetic rail to dock with. There wasn't any damage aside from some dents caused by fallen rubble. His life was saved. Xie Junping was completely awake now. He issued a command in a hurry to make the flying car come over to act as a foothold. They were freed from danger a minute later. Xie Junping didn't have the strength to speak, having just escaped from mortal danger. He simply tended to his wound while sitting in the cockpit of the flying car. His entire body was weak. It took a while before Luo Nan returned inside the car. He had tossed his loose-leaf notebook to the ground to free his hands before saving someone. Naturally, he had to pick it back up. Luo Nan closed his eyes as soon as he returned to his sitting spot. His body sweated a great amount of sweat. He had exhausted far too much physical energy just then. He only felt at ease when he recovered his notebook. Only then did some life return to him. Xie Junping was stupefied for a while before he finally thought of a few things he ought to do. The situation appeared to be at an anticlimax, but Luo Nan had maintained a level head and rescued him in the most critical moment. Otherwise, Xie Junping would have probably become the saddest dead member of Acumen College's honor society. This was without a doubt a life-saving grace. Xie Junping twisted his head around with the intention of displaying his gratitude when a crackling sound rushed forth. The micro earbuds embedded in his ear rebooted. Wying shouted, "Hey, hey, sucker, you're fine, right?" The corner of Xie Junping's mouth twitched. An intense state of mind spurred him into roaring without caring what Luo Nan would think of him. "Suck your sister, suck your mother." Wying was silent for some time. The voice proceeded to transmit over. This time the voice wasn't brash, yet it didn't necessarily lack anger. "Okay then, young Xie. I don't care what your situation is right now, but you must leave that place at once. According to my surveillance, an intense impact went off approximately 2 kilometers to the northwest of you and 1 kilometer underground. The energy of the impact is equivalent to that of a small nuclear warhead. It had created an electromagnetic storm. As for if the ionization radiation has exceeded safe limits, well, it's hard to explain." Nuclear warhead. Xie Junping's mood was pressed dead. He finally understood why all the electronics on his body had totally malfunctioned. He checked flustered if he could lock the door to his car, and he turned on the detection system. A few seconds passed, and nothing at all happened. Nope, nothing shows up here. Then you need to hurry up and leave. Can it be you want to stay there and help the police do a write-up? Wang gave him a new set of coordinates after speaking. Xie Junping cursed as he started up his flying car. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't an earthquake. Terribly sorry. We can't discover anything within a 12-square-kilometer range about a case of an earthquake that actually exceeded a magnitude of 9. So, I'm inclined to believe that this was due to an accident of disastrous levels. Wang analyzed the situation some more and put forth a suggestion. Furthermore, it's best for you to return to Mangzhong immediately. An earthquake of magnitude 4.5 happened there a minute ago, honest to God. Those colleagues of yours are probably running all over the place, searching for people. Xie Junping lost even the strength to curse. Wang continued speaking. I've already gone above and beyond for you. I've asked for a high-altitude shuttle to come over from your father's company. It'll arrive in 90 seconds and will basically guarantee that you'll arrive back in Mangzhong within 20 minutes. Wang's calculations were proven to be extremely accurate. The phantom flying car had just arrived at the coordinates given by Wang when their call had just terminated. A landing platform atop of joint skyscrapers. This place was relatively peaceful since it was outside the 12-square-kilometer range. There were only shattered glass that were being cleaned up by janitor bots in some places. A Hummingbird model shuttle had just arrived, landing on the platform with a rumble. Xie Junping stared at the shuttle. He was somewhat muddle-headed, so he slapped his face as an effort to raise his spirits. He got out of the car and walked a few steps. Then he suddenly turned his head. I have no words to thank with for your great grace, Junior. I'll remember this favor. Your current state is also not that great, so I'll leave this car for you to ride. Go get yourself checked at the hospital. I'll get in touch with you later. Having said this, he transferred the control privileges of the phantom flying car over to Luo Nan. This way Luo Nan could use his own wristband to execute basic controls. Luo Nan knew that Xie Junping had just walked out through the gates of hell. Xie Junping's state of mind was in complete disorder at the time, yet he was able to think of this. This morality was very hard to come by, so Luo Nan did not speak any further. He nodded to continue on. Xie Junping gave Luo Nan a bow and jogged to board the shuttle. Soon the shuttle soared into the air, directly piercing the depths of the sky. Tranquility was returned to the landing platform. Luo Nan took a few deep breaths, straightened his back, extended his arm forward, and grabbed the performance drink on top of the control panel. But this single action costed nearly all his strength. He leaned back heavily. He took a deep breath and spoke softly, "Close doors." The phantom's vertical doors folded and closed, forming a seal on the car's empty space. Luo Nan didn't need to sit in the cockpit. All he needed was to set up the route to the school. The Phantom was a highly intelligent flying car. Obviously, it could take him to his destination. But Luo Nan gave an order that had nothing to do with his school. Return trip. The flying car turned around, entering in a path automatically. Luo Nan continued to use voice control to open the makeup mirrors. The AI spouted out a fine mist of water in a human-like fashion, and the lukewarm steam of water was thrown on Luo Nan's face. What should have been a comfortable sensation was instead like countless sharp blades scraping across Luo Nan's face. It was so much that Luo Nan's entire body began to twitch. He saw an ashen face that lacked life in the mirror. Simply like that, of an incurable patient at the terminal stages of his disease. Luo Nan pulled back the corners of his mouth as he tried to twist open the drink, but his fingers lacked the strength. They ached and they pained. He failed 5 to 6 times before he succeeded. He fished out a military energy bar from his pocket and ripped apart the packaging. He swallowed all of the energy bar, with the drink down to his belly. His entire self even trembled a few times, yet there was a certain warmth that expanded from his belly to the limbs and bones of his body. His sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system worked in tandem, following the consumption of the foreign nutrients. His digestive and blood circulation system worked in opposition to maintain harmony, causing energy to rapidly permeate through every organ and muscle tissue of his body. This was a basic mechanism of the operation of the human body that was ingrained in the foundation of the skeletal and fleshly body. This modern feature was formed from countless generations of hereditary evolution. However, Luo Nan's operational mechanisms, ingestion and digestion efficiency actually exceeded other people's efficiency by 5 to 10-fold. The color of his face in the mirror rapidly took for a better turn. His appearance became the same as normal in a short few seconds. This efficiency came from his 5 years of following his grandfather's related theories and painful fruits of research. The core concept behind his grandfather's theory was called formatting. This theory system could be described approximately as a primitive notion. Taking heaven and earth, taking the universe, all living beings in the world could be approximately divided into 3 levels: the self, society, and heaven and earth. There was a special format at each layer to convey the core content of one's existence, operation, and birth and death. Complicated effects and interactions happened constantly amidst each layer. His grandfather's deep, dense, and profound theory was not something that could be understood by relying on experiments and recordings. It was far from what a person his age was capable of. He could only concentrate on the basics at this time, on the adjustments and molding of self-formatting. Self-formatting was the core of his grandfather's theory, a necessary, permanent evolution. This was the cornerstone of societal formatting that could bear the weight of heaven and earth. To realize and awaken the hidden potential of the human body to possess supernatural strength. This was the basic premise of evolution. Luo Nan followed his grandfather's records of experiments over the course of 5 years for this reason. He utilized the stimulation of drugs to progressively remold his own nervous system. This was the axis which influenced every organ in the body, adjusting their operational mechanisms for the sake of forming fundamental changes. Luo Nan was still only in the early stages of self-formatting at the moment. This stage was recorded by his grandfather as the vessel. The main purpose of this stage was to harmonize all the body's organs and systems for digesting and extracting nutrients from food. The body then stocked and stored the energy, even nurturing the mind. It allowed for a person's basic functions to progressively adapt to the new environment and create the appropriate reaction. Luo Nan gradually began to possess a few abilities after forming the basic structure of the vessel. For example, his digestive, absorptive, and recovery capabilities was strengthened to be an appetite king, and his mental communication is similar to that of a hypnosis master. He had used this ability to order the crow before. Today he had used it on Xie Junping. The results were quite decent. Of course, these abilities were only the icing on a cake. The true value still lied in the fundamental modifications to his body from self-formatting. And accordingly, any elements that could influence his self-formatting and damage the structure of his existing vessel can't be taken lightly. Luo Nan watched buildings and pedestrians rapidly zoom by outside the car window. His eyebrows were fixed from beginning to end. Finally, a notice popped out from the car's AI. The magnetic rail ahead has been damaged. Changing routes now. The flying car had arrived at the broken part of the overpass right now. There was still a short distance to the location where Luo Nan and Xie Junping had been in danger. However, the area ahead was blocked off, and there was a pile of media reporters who rushed to get here. It would be very difficult to get any closer. The earthquake had affected approximately the entire area of the overpass. Looking from on top of the bridge to the west, one could see a palpitating, dilapidated, whether it be through the naked eye or by the rendering of a car's AI. There were two collapsed 100-story skyscrapers engraved in ruin with rising dust near the epicenter of the earthquake. Swaying flames also invaded the turbid fog. It was simply a missile-cleansing scene reconstructed from a page of a Third War biography. And to the east of the overpass, one could see the majority of the metropolis displaying its flourishing nature. An extraordinary powerful impact with a limited range. Luo Nan could only sneer if this was an earthquake. His upper body erected straight. His vision was cast through the window to the ruins in the distance, combining with the scene of the environment. The order of events flashed back in his mind. He sent out another order to fish out an image automatically recorded by the car's AI. He had to sigh a breath in admiration at how high-end the Phantom was. All angles were recorded in high definition, conserving the details to the utmost limit. Luo Nan selected the time when he and Xie Junping were hanging off the broken overpass, to when they had a moment of reprieve from the crisis, and when the sound shockwave exploded over, nearly damning them beyond redemption. Luo Nan started up the virtual mode function for the sake of understanding that situation more clearly. The car's windows cut off external vision on the spot, and the projection system crammed layers of lights and shadows inside the car. After the viewpoint was adjusted, Luo Nan found himself seemingly back within that period of crisis. The angle towards the direction of the epicenter was perfect according to when he was pulling Xie Junping. When the shockwave hit, flames erupted between skyscrapers and the air vibrated like water. Then, things became like they are now. Luo Nan's eyes jumped all over, and he sent another order and braced himself. He let the recording rewind backwards. He could see every frame packed with color and interlinked to form a complete chain. He couldn't find any flaw at all. Luo Nan replayed the recording node to the time when Xie Junping was standing on top of the car. The result was no different. He stopped wasting time and opened up his notebook and pondered for a bit. The digital pen dragged on top of the flexible e-ink screen, sketching various shades of exquisite lines. The lines overlapped to construct an outline very quickly. It was a vague blob of an image that possessed a slightly humanoid shape, yet there were several inhuman signs to it. Its limbs were bent, stretched, and unrestrained. It seemed to merge into the shadowy background. It was impossible to see its face, even though its head was composed of a few dozen or so intertwined drawn lines. It also oozed with a ruthless and sinister flavor. Luo Nan paused his pen and thought. Then he performed a slight modification. The outer area of the shadow warped more fiercely under a somewhat excessive stroke. It was as if the shadow was burning up. A demon of hell was simply drawn in this manner. Its body was wrapped in dark and poisonous flames as it arrived on Earth. Luo Nan personally looked over the slightly illuminated flexible screen. His heart actually faintly palpitated. It was as if the burning wraith was about to leap forth from the flexible e-ink screen at the next moment. Chapter 6: Illusionary Wraith. Luo Nan stared at his drawing for a long time before deciding that he didn't need to add or remove anything. Then he took the completed drawn sketch and performed a simple 3D rendering, importing the sketch into the computer's AI database. The sketch was run through an image processing function in order to import his work of art into the recording. The phantom flying car's AI capabilities are admittedly heaven-defying, but this sort of specialized image splicing requires specialized software to process. The result created in this ad hoc fashion completely didn't look like a drawing. It appeared rather grotesque. But in Luo Nan's opinion, this low-quality spliced drawing was the best fit with his memories. Luo Nan saw the enormous wraith clearly at this moment. It emerged from within the exploding flames, towering over 100 meters. It roared in fury amidst the collapsing ruins and dust. The explosive impact of its roar was like several heavy fists, or like a giant wheel steamrolling through. It was so much that Luo Nan felt all his internal organs shape and morph. The flesh and blood all over his body erupted with a sound, and the air was pervaded with the odor of blood and death. He truly thought he was done for a moment. This was the full view of what he saw, of what he felt. The real world was not a fantasy film, and Luo Nan knew this. The things he saw and felt was really far too bizarre. So he returned to the scene of the matter once again, juxtaposing the scene's environment and watching the recording in reverse. He also observed the reactions in the surrounding areas. And finally the result was dull, ordinary, and not the least bit surprising. Was it a hallucination? Luo Nan flexed and stretched his fingers, closing his eyes. He adjusted his breathing and silently chanted the 20-word mantra. The visualization of the diagram appeared in the void. The tetrahedron, inner sphere, and circumscribed sphere slowly rotated. Several blocked circuits ahead were slowly restored back to being flowing and unhindered. Visualizing the diagram cannot be described simply as a hallucination. The diagram visualization technique showed clearly that his vessel took some slight damage. However, the vessel was in the middle of a rapid recovery. The long-distance marathon running training over the past several years did not give Luo Nan a particularly buff physique. Instead, it gave him super outstanding endurance and recovery capabilities. It wasn't a huge problem, but Luo Nan was extremely concerned about it. Actually, Luo Nan had already come to a solution under his own logic, but he didn't rush to conclusions. He thought deeply for a time. Soon, a list of relevant information appeared. At the time of the incident, the initial earthquake stage was already over. The atmospheric pressure was 104 kilopascals, which was within standard basic levels of atmospheric pressure. The shock of the explosive sound reached nearly 90 decibels then, which did not reach levels of damaging one's hearings. A 44-kilometer/hour wind was caused by the incident, Acura Class 6 intensity of wind. Other than the above, the temperature, humidity levels, radiation values, and other data were all within normal ranges. This was only a normal, maybe somewhat noisy, very windy day from just looking at the data. These circumstances caused two great young masters to be shocked out of their wits. Wouldn't that be a joke? And there was another point. Luo Nan used his finger to mark a distance in video analysis mode. There is a distance of 2.9 kilometers from the broken bridge to the heart of the epicenter. The sound waves should have a delay of approximately 8 seconds. But was this really the case? Cold hard data was much more credible than his memories, adding to the incomprehensible mystery. The data showed that the flying car Phantom received the powerful sound wave vibration earlier than the erupting flames by 7 milliseconds. Sound had run past light. This was obviously ridiculous according to common sense. The origin of the explosive sound and the flames was torn into two pieces in face of the data. And so a clear paradox emerged between the flames and the explosive sound, between the explosive sound and the human reaction. Luo Nan raised his head, no longer watching any images or videos. He leaned heavily back against the chair. A hallucination, a bullshit hallucination. There was clearly a sort of force from an unseen plane, a bizarre force that meddled in the relationships of everything here. It filled up what had been originally empty space. The burning wraith was the indicator to this sort of force. This wasn't science. What Luo Nan wanted wasn't science. The formatting theory that his grandfather created had entered into the realm of metaphysics from the very start. Luo Nan had intimate fanatical feelings towards his grandfather's theory, so much so that he could place the theory on the same level as his life. However, he could not find a clear reference to the theory from his results so far. Though he did have the Appetite King, Hypnosis Master, and other tricks that have already exceeded the limits of ordinary people, the level of these capabilities weren't conclusive. They absolutely have not reached the level of fundamental changes, to say the least. What would count as a fundamental change under self-formatting? What is the criteria for a fundamental change? If it's a so-called supernatural force, what would be its manifestation? Luo Nan was unable to find the answer from within the chaotic and complicated records of his grandfather's experiments. 5 years had passed where he engaged in closed self-study, self-talk, and discussion. He felt that he was advancing step by step, but he was unable to reach a conclusion to the issue of this criteria. But now a reference object had appeared. His heart pumped out blood that was as blazing hot as lava, yet all Luo Nan did was breath in a deep breath. His 10 fingers gripped his notebook, and he lowered his chin. He controlled the pounding of his pair of heart and body. There wasn't even time to celebrate before the tip of the iceberg of the force had been exposed. The force looked that it could return to the other world behind the dark screen at any moment. There was still a lot of work that Luo Nan had to do. The car's AI had finished switching routes at this time, changing roads to do a detour. However, the damage of an over 10 square kilometers area caused quite the effect on the city's traffic. Several layers of traffic in the air were closed off even if it was early in the morning. The moving vehicles began to slightly stop up. The vehicles were incapable of speeding up. Luo Nan deleted the data and gathered records, saved automatically by the AI, to avoid revealing information about the burning wraith by deliberately making things more complicated. Then he opened the news channel to check relevant news on this earthquake. The majority of media was still in the phase of broadcasting in the form of text messages, since the time from the incident was too short. Only the Star-Associated Press demonstrated the haughtiness of a world-class media. They promptly purchased the video shot, by the unmanned sentinel drones in the vicinity of the incident. They spliced them to create a satellite shot, seizing the first resources. This recording wasn't even 2 minutes in length, yet it was pushed higher and higher on social media to receive greater and greater attention. The bird's-eye view image was clearer, showing that the overpass was only really part of the outer perimeter of damage. The location of epicenter of the earthquake had completely caved in to form an enormous ruin. The caved area still was unable to be filled, revealing an enormous hole. Azure lightning continued to jump. It was an exceptionally eye-catching sight under the glow of twilight. What sort of situation was going on inside the enormous hole? How many casualties were there? Not a single media outlet had a definite report. The municipal administration and the police began to get involved at this time, guiding traffic in the surrounding area. The cleanup and rescue jobs had yet to officially unfold, but transport vehicles have already emerged in the air. They began to drop all sorts of engineering bots. The government's response time was already quite fast, relatively speaking. At least they far exceeded their typical level. The flying cars' movement speed decreased slower and slower. The police performed a few inspections on the passing vehicles as they cleared the way for traffic. One car would be inspected, yet another would not. Their criteria for inspection was unknown. It appeared not to be their usual practice. Luo Nan won the pick. A police officer to the side notified him to stop his vehicle. The police officer waited for the window to roll down before raising a request. "Sir, please turn off your vehicle's radar and related equipment to avoid interfering with the search and rescue effort." Luo Nan was cooperative in a flash. He sent out an order in front of the police officer, turning off the functionality of relevant systems. The police officer waved his hand to let Luo Nan pass. But the ad hoc barrier gate pole closed in front of Luo Nan just as the car started. The police officer chased after him with 2 steps, indicating for him to stop once again. But not only did the police officer indicate to Luo Nan, he also indicated to all the cars coming in on the road. Someone with a temper rapidly shouted, "What's going on? We are temporarily transferring rescue equipment. The traffic near the site of the incident will be temporarily closed off. Everyone, please be calm and patient." This police officer was approximately 40 years old. It appeared that he had calm temperament and a friendly bearing. However, there really weren't anybody who dared to explode with barbed words in front of him. This was because this officer was a standard riot police officer who wore defensive combat gear. He towered over 2 meters, being supported by his exoskeleton armor to have the back of a tiger and waist of a bear. He could completely lift a 1-ton heavy flying car and send it flying down the road. Some equipment had just been air-dropped. If there's more equipment coming, then that means the area of the incident probably will be inaccessible. Luo Nan raised his head to the skies. The sky was imbued with light at this time, expanding the horizon. There truly were medium-sized transport ships hovering in the air. They seemed to be from the military, but he didn't see any equipments being tossed down. The situation's changing. The Star Associated Press's senior on-site reporter was on the news channel. He shot a scene of the area from a helicopter and described the current situation. The state of congestion has become more serious in the surrounding area. The number of stopped vehicles is increasing more and more. From what can be seen from the present, the government and police have not focused their energy on relieving traffic. Instead, the control measures by the police have become more severe. The locked-down area is increasing larger without end. All the vehicle owners on the road would certainly be greatly empathetic to this news report. Most of the surrounding roads have already become parking lots. The positions of many cars haven't changed at all within a 10-minute interval. The inspections by the riot control police become more severe. Some cars who have already been inspected had to come over and be re-inspected. Luo Nan was much more calm and collected when compared to the rest of the vehicle owners voicing discontent noisily down the roads. His objective right now was to collect all relevant information. He was precisely given more ideas from being stopped for a bit longer near the vicinity of the incident. He was switching between several news channels in order to search for news of worth. At the same time, he cast his sight towards his own social media. He frequently browsed forums, communities, and etc. As he watched the news, he swiped on a web page. The car's AI, the flexible e-ink screen, and even his wristband were all utilized and mobilized. His workload was a joy to behold, but he was unable to find any clues so far. It hadn't even been half an hour since the incident, so every news outlet had yet to make an in-depth report. The majority of information on social media interaction platforms were rumors. The difficulty to sift through all this information to find something of use was far too high. The news still needs to circulate for a while. Luo Nan shook his head. His fingers streaked across the flexible screen, and he subconsciously clicked open a certain icon. An interface opened to reveal a familiar setting of sparse stars spread about. This was precisely his most frequented secret star forums. To Luo Nan, the secret star forums was a goods purchasing channel. He had never made a statement on a public board for the sake of safety. At most, he would skim a few interesting topics. The niche specialized forum had a slower response to the sudden news outbreak, and it was harder to form a lively discussion there. It was not of great importance to gather information here. He came here purely due to habit. The most popular topic pushed to the top today looked to lack any pertinent information. Its topic was a collective nightmare, the release of spiritual waves, typical styling of the mystic arts. Luo Nan wasn't interested in these sorts of topics. Since he had some free time now, he sent a well-thought private message to the internal board's moderator as an attempt to lift the ban from his account number in advance. Luo Nan spent a few minutes on the wording. Then when he exited from the PM interface, he discovered a topic's discussion page count explodes several times in size on the home page. The liveness caused a bright star result. A soul topic was drawn out and turned into a raging and burning star. And at this moment, perhaps that moderator felt that the original headline wasn't drawing enough posts, and so he made a change. The headline flashed and turned into the words Xie City's R&D District Earthquake Nightmare Centralized Discussion Thread, New Merged Thread. Whoa! Luo Nan had accidentally clicked into the thread at the first moment of its creation. The contents posted by the original poster was very simple. The Yusol described that he was a Xie City resident residing near the R&D district, and that he had been sleeping at the time of the earthquake. He had a dream half asleep and half awake. He had been swallowed whole by flames in that dream, and he had heard an enormous roar. The seismic wave was like a gigantic ship steamrolling over his body. It probably represented sleep paralysis. It wouldn't be that important if it was just this much information. The key lies at the moment when Yusol woke from the scare. His wife next to him was also scared into waking up. These two just had the same dream. Every single detail was extremely similar, like they watched a horror film as a couple. Yusol posted this experience on the forums. No one really paid attention to it at first, and Yusol didn't take it seriously himself. He just directly posted live updates on the earthquake. He never thought there would be other people starting their own threads a short few minutes later, talking about the earthquake nightmare matter. The content of their dream worlds were described practically completely the same as Yusol's. Afterwards, people followed up one after another. Some replied to the post in the thread, some started a separate thread with a post, finally igniting the Secret Star forums on this morning day. Huge discussions had begun. Anyhow, the niche forum's liveness also had its limitations. Luo Nan skimmed 10 lines with a glance, soon sweeping over the contents of every post. He still had a large feeling of dissatisfaction. There were only 2 or 3 people who had truly experienced this instance for themselves. The Secret Star Forums was small, and its members were from all over the world. Over 70,000 registered IDs divided by 88 leaves, not even 1,000 people. Those who lived near the R&D district numbered even fewer. Some people had recognized this point. They started to introduce the news into popular forums and social media relevant information on the topic. Large numbers of people can handle matters well. Luo Nan had painstakingly searched for information in vain, but information surged forth under the searching of the collective whole of over 1,000 people. Only now did many people find out the topic of the collective nightmare of Xie City. It had already formed an underground surge on the internet, and it was expanding with greater and greater momentum. The discussion atmosphere in the Secret Star forums grew more feverish. Even though the moderator had set up a separate merged thread rule, there were still people opening new threads unceasingly. Related topics were dragged in deep, and an ID by the name of Historical Data Shredder started a new post. He had set up a statistical diagram of this incident. He took all relevant cases on the internet and fed them into the chart. Moreover, he updated without end, soon causing his topic to have the bright star effect. Luo Nan felt that his words had meaning. The numbers were organized excellently. The nightmare spirit wave's range of influence can be seen from the diagram to be a maximum distance of 300 kilometers, covering the entire city of Xie. The center of the area of the incident has a radius of approximately 10 kilometers. I shall call it the core area. There has been over 20 cases on the internet at the present, and it doesn't matter who were sleeping in the incident. They were all awakened. Historical Data Shredder had organized over a total of 50 valid cases. Half of them were in the core area. The density of cases dropped significantly outside of the core area. The further the distance, the rarer the cases. This was very hard to validate. However, Historical Data Shredder proclaimed that according to his understanding, a considerable portion of reactions that occurred outside the core area were recognized as people who engaged in cultivation or religious practice. He supported his claim endlessly with new relevant information, and he hoped that everyone would aid him in his efforts, and so on. Then Yusol, the very first poster, also responded. He said that he'll bring his wife to the hospital for a checkup in just a moment, and that he'll post the result on the forums, creating a piece of awaiting information. Luo Nan pinched his chin lightly. Then he immediately contacted his school's medical department through his wristband to book an appointment for a body examination. He was preparing to compare his results with those of the Yusol couple. Bang bang, bang bangs. A disconcerting noise suddenly entered his ear. The window of the cockpit was alarming from a large force. Luo Nan froze heart and soul. The person outside directly stomped a foot at the car door during this moment of pause. Then came a sharp, piercing voice that not even the fully soundproof car was able to block. Xie Junping, get out of there. Chapter 7, Damned by a Failure. The flying car phantom, alarmed with a sharp cry. Not only this did not deter the behavior of the person outside the car, instead she became even more intense and continued kicking a few heavy blows in succession. Son of a bitch, what was the meaning of tossing me to the curb? Luo Nan looked out of the car, and his eyebrows jumped. He saw a snow-white thigh raised up in the air, and the tail of skirt on the verge of tearing, wrapping a pair of buttocks. His vision twitched up to sweep over to the person's face. A short recollection caused him to remember this person right on the number. It was Juicy Long Legs. Fine, this woman's name was Lion Yu. She also participated in the Society Promotion and Advice Convention on the 24th. She was the society representative of the Student Council. She was none other than the person who had embraced Xie Junping, practically being dragged onto the car in the earliest hours of the morning. But when she caused Xie Junping to have a contrast with his political life, she was then tossed away like a pair of worn-out shoes. Luo Nan did not judge others' virtues and ethics. He was disinclined to go around judging people, and more so, he didn't want to get in a bind with her. He directly lowered the car windows and gave a simple response. Senior Xie's not here. Is there a problem, Senior Lion? Lion Yu stared blankly at the completely empty cockpit. Then she was awoken by the sound, Senior Lion. She swept her gaze over Luo Nan twice with eyes that still contained bewilderness. Her figure suddenly left from the car window. Several seconds later, the window on Luo Nan's side of the car also began alarming due to a large force. Luo Nan shook his head and lowered the car window. Then two hands with long manicured fingernails unexpectedly reached probingly inside to grab his neck with a death grip. She hauled vigorously from outside of the car window. "Thief, catch this thief!" Lion Yu's shrieking voice sounded far down the road. The group of vehicle owners in the surrounding had minds filled with buzzing about this long-legged beauty, kicking a luxurious car in fury. But since now they encountered such a lively opportunity, their hearts grew more like a praying cat. They followed their desires and leapt to action. However, a group of drunk youngsters that had yet to sober up were more direct than the vehicle owners. They ignored the warning given by the police officer. They exited from luxury cars a row back and swarmed over like a cluster of bees. Lion Yu also had come over from there. They likely were those who had just finished partying at the nightclub and were stuck here on their route back home. This group of out-of-control youngsters had seized the opportunity, causing the surrounding vehicle owners to unexpectedly not dare get close. After all, what kind of people were they? The youngsters first crowded and gathered towards the side of the car window while roaring with sharp laughter. But then they discovered that the space was narrow over there, that they weren't able to squeeze any more people. They howled and punched at the flying car worth 500 million in hopes of leaving behind some marks or damage on the car's body. They did not care at all about the ear-piercing alarm. Some people even used the hood of the car as a drum to produce the wild beat of a nightclub. Noise, noise, make some noise. Thief, thief, catch the thief. Old Xie's magic trick's quite good. He's turned into a pretty boy to shock me. Lion Yu would kidnap a person, but won't steal a car. Old Xie tossed away a car and even tossed away a person. Look, 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 peek, peek, peek. In the back trunk is there some. Someone seriously went to go lift open the back trunk amidst the chaos. But how could he possibly open it? Instead, he was kicked in the buttocks by a companion, causing him to roll beneath the car. The chaotic, crazed, and violent scene caused the surrounding vehicle owners to stare gapingly. At this moment in the car, although Luo Nan had been caught off guard and grabbed by the neck by Lion Yu, his reactions were extremely quick. He pulled up from the back of the chair just then and gripped onto Lion Yu's radial artery, directly sapping her strength. Lion Yu ate pain and wasn't able to hold onto equilibrium. She fell headfirst into the car, and the two people's faces were pressed together in an instant. Lion Yu was still currently wearing heavy makeup from clubbing. Her facial features were all the more deeply solid. They were charming and alluring. However, Luo Nan's vision pierced through the mask of highlighter, blush, and fake eyelashes. He saw the swollen figure of the woman and the thickly crossed, bloodshot heterochromic eyes. From the additional response of the body beneath his fingertips, he could conclude that Lion Yu and her group of wild companions not only had yet to recover from their hangover, they also had taken some drugs when they were partying. This was nothing for those with rich families, but they never thought of the trouble that would come from exhibiting such unbridled behavior in the crowded public. Most of all, there was an experienced police officer in the vicinity. Forget it, he could only hope that this group of people would use their heads, otherwise they would lose all respect. Luo Nan absolutely didn't expect to get involved with this group of retards. He pushed away Lion Yu, but before he could figure out a way to handle things, the middle-aged police officer came walking over again while calling people over the phone. The gaze that was casted over was increasing in guard, to the extent that the officer even placed his hand on the weapon's firing position. And also at this moment, the car's AI sounded out with a warning that was completely different than, "Attention. The vehicle has been subjected to several various types of scans. There are risks of breaches of privacy. I suggest to start though." A vibrating, buzzing cry sounded forth before the warning could finish. A number of 10 small sentinel drones spanned through the congested cars. They scuttled back and forth in the airspace of this area and communicated with the cold sound of machinery. All those who aren't police personnel on the road must put their hands behind their heads and get down. You have violated the emergency state law and orders Section 16 Paragraph 5's provision and will be subjected to an investigation. I repeat. A crowd of youngsters stared blankly at the small drones fluttering around like bats. Most of the noisy, hysterical mood immediately dissipated in a flash. However, not everyone was able to maintain a basic level of soberness. The fighters then stuck their middle fingers towards the bats in the sky. Get lost, police dogs. A pulse of blazing electricity was given to him in response. The fighters weren't able to make a single snort. Their large faces slanted downwards as they lay on the ground. They let out a muffled sound that caused one's heart to shiver. The area surrounding the flying car Phantom became vacated on the spot. As long as one possessed a brain, one would immediately put their hands behind their head and get down on the ground. Even if there was occasionally someone who was frozen, they were dragged forcefully to the ground by their companions. It was impossible to reason with unmanned sentinel drones, right? Society had always somewhat dismissed these intelligent law enforcement machines. They were spoken as lacking severity, and that they easily cause mishaps. But the best publicly recognized method to face situations of chaos was still to use unmanned machines for purging. They could maximize the elimination of the human element to provide proper communication between all parties. This group of well-trained children of rich families understood early on that their privileges were only effective towards living people. A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. At most, they would be taken to the police station. Otherwise, how would their lawyers make a living? Lion Yu also lay down on the ground outside of the car window. Luo Nan received peace at last, but this kind of peace wasn't what he wanted at all. The middle-aged police came over to the side of the vehicle once again. The youngsters on the ground were quite obedient. At most, they would slightly nudge their position with extreme caution. They feared to have the heavy exoskeleton armor stomp on their heads, or something like that. Still, there were some people who firmly committed the police officer's face to memory, vowing to humiliate him later on. The middle-aged police officer paid no heed to the careful intentions of the youngsters on the ground. He stood next to the car window and watched Luo Nan closely. He also ran his eyes over inside to see the interior state of the vehicle. The car's AI was still emitting the privacy breach warning. Luo Nan resented noise, so he simply shut it off. He understood the so-called several various types of scans clearly. He was 80% certain that it was caused by a database retriever tool used by this police officer. Luo Nan was calm from the bottom of his heart. He took the initiative by asking, "Is there a problem, officer?" Since Luo Nan was cooperative, the middle-aged police officer also moved according to procedure. He saluted towards Luo Nan and showed his credentials. His name, Zhu Weiren, was shown on there. Unexpectedly, he was already 50 or so years old. It was impossible to tell his age from his appearance. The negotiations between these two were quite peaceful up until this moment. But this atmosphere immediately collapsed to pieces as soon as Officer Zhu asked Luo Nan to open the back trunk. Officer Zhu grabbed a translucent box from the back of the trunk. He ceased talking with Luo Nan and directly tore open the case. The finger enveloped in armor revealed an agileness that was astonishing. Soon he saw separate small sealed bottles within the box. He twisted open a bottle and took out a pill in the shape of a capsule from within. White specks of fine powder scattered with a slight twist. A scanner that hung at the waist of Officer Zhu flickered with a red light. He turned and stared fixed at Luo Nan with a bad expression. Luo Nan's eyes slightly jumped from the corner. His many years of experience with experiments made him particularly sensitive to certain drugs. It also woke him to the troubling state he was presently in. It was the failure Xie Junping's entertainment. Another ridiculous thought leapt forth immediately. Maybe he could get a channel of resources from Xie Junping in the future. Xie Junping sneezed, his nostrils glowing red. He knew that most people would blame a virus as the cause. To catch a cold, to be stressed, it was all brought onto himself. He had barely settled the situation here in Mangzhong for the time being. The misfortune in Xie City nearly caused him to piss his pants in fright. There was a pot of destiny still in the car. How could he have overlooked it? The one who told Xie Junping this piece of news was precisely Miss Zhang Yingying of the Hidden Indigo's business office. The two sides no longer needed to be surreptitious at the present. It was fine to engage directly in virtual communication. With the powers of AR technology, the two people seemed to be sitting across each other for discussion in a reception room. Xie Junping had always criticized Zhang Yingying silently for being a phone operator. She just handled answering the phone and related work in Hidden Indigo's office. But Xie Junping had to admit that this sharp-tongued phone operator was indeed an extremely eye-catching beauty. Zhao Yingying appeared to be only 18–19 years old at first glance. Her medium-short hair was free and loose. Her facial features gave a bright impression with a hint of a boyish flavor, but her figure was not the least bit that of a boy's. It was already autumn. She wore a camisole revealing snowy white shoulders and neck. Two slender straps crisscrossed above her bulging and steamy bosom. It was sufficient to attract the gaze of every male. From the waist down was a short denim skirt. Multiple layers of decorative belt loops made it look completely cool. At this moment, her long, snowy white legs were raised high on the boss's table. Roman flat sandals rocked left and right, to and fro in a very casual manner. The denim skirt slid all the way up to the base of her legs, but there wasn't a way to take advantage of this due to the issue with the angle. Xie Junping did not have any thoughts of taking advantage of her at the moment. He was pacing back and forth in the room, restless and fretful. Everyone knew that low addictive psychotropic drugs were spread unchecked in popularity in the modern world. It was simply inconceivable for this entertainment to not appear in the private parties of rich folk. But public political opinion didn't care about this. As long as you stupidly expose possession of the drug, you're certain to have a hammer come down and kill you. You won't get the chance to defend yourself. In a certain sense, this was even more severe than him sneaking off to party. In addition, there was the issue with the fatal fuse composed of his group of good-for-nothing friends. Every linking thread was connected together. The consequences wouldn't be as simple as 1 + 1. Lion Yu, you slut. Li Zucheng, I've committed you to memory. Liu Tao, you bastard, you surely. Xie Junping was like a cornered beast. He wailed in this virtual iron prison. Obviously, he urgently wanted to know what were the circumstances in Xie City. Had he been implicated already? What do you have hungry lawyers for? Let them handle things. Zhang Yingying had a get some distance from me you troublemaker expression of resentment. She showed signs of slacking off. Xie Junping's heart became clear as a mirror. This shameless girl clearly treated him as a sucker. The problem was that his mind had panicked. He could only bring an obsequious smile on his face. In these unusual times, I still ask of you experts to be more at ease. It's only natural that my remuneration will be sufficient. Zhang Yingying spread her fingers. Then how do you want it done? Should I go bust people from a military transport ship? Military transport ship? Why would it be military? Xie Junping's voice changed in tone. Zhang Yingying extended 3 fingers. The government, the military, Quantum Corporation. These 3 bases of research and development are working together in production, at least in name. Now they've inexplicably set off a nuclear warhead. Nuclear warhead. Xie Junping's face went completely black. Don't misunderstand, it was just an example. In any case, it's really about the same. Anyway, no one would accept this outcome. But what exactly is going on then? A natural disaster? A terrorist attack? Zhang Yingying's feet rocked back and forth quite freely. Right now, all sides must provide an explanation, most notably the government and the military. These two do nothing but delegate work to others. Before, they would consume kickbacks from Quantum Corporation, enjoying the benefits even though they shouldn't. Now that something has happened, I've discovered that no one has any clue about the state of their laboratory. Was it an accident? Or were they getting rid of something? How would one who's not deeply involved be able to report the situation to the people up top? Xie Junping still was unable to understand. But it can't be so bad that they'll be tossed onto military ships, right? That's because you don't understand the severity of the situation. This one sentence from Zhang Yingying tore Xie Junping's soul in half. She then extended 5 fingers. This is how much that piece of information costs. Xie Junping's face changed colors. You're ripping me off. Zhang Yingying laughed with a ha. This number was adjusted to a degree due to our long collaborative relationship. Otherwise, if you were to leave us, I will. Her delicate white palm flipped over and over in a very genuine manner. I concede. Xie Junping's face was ash, but he still swallowed his tone. If he was going to spend money, might as well spend it to the end. It would be the stupidest way to die if he were to leave things unfinished. Zhang Yingying blew him a kiss. Relax, it's worth this much. Any information involving burners is simply worth this much. Burners? Yep, I got this from a reliable channel of information. The high-end laboratory was specialized in handling the research of the mechanism behind burning. Their focus was towards nerve anatomy. Live experimentation with the human body. Xie Junping could not be blamed for having his mind run wild. He had heard the information pertinent to Luo Nan before. The impression from then ran far deeply. Naturally, he would now have associative thoughts. Zhang Yingying also didn't make a conclusion. The project was launched as an experiment performed on the mutants on the books. As for what else they researched, who knows? She paused slightly before speaking again. Anyway, this is all of little importance. What's important is that the laboratory must have been engaging in their first large experiment. Their power system was forcefully shut down by someone, causing their experiment to go out of control and leading to a major accident. There is a disastrous number of casualties, and the culprit took the opportunity to steal away some important experimental prototype. Xie Junping blurted out, "Deep blue walkers." Zhang Yingying gave him a blank eye. Ridiculous. Rumor has it that the prototype is a newly developed product from Quantum Corporation, the structure of a chemical drug. Martial law for search and seizure has been imposed in the surrounding area right now. If this isn't effective, the whole city of Xie will become a chaotic mess. Oh, hold on. What does this have to do with those who have been lifted onto the transport ships? Zhang Yingying responded effortlessly. Right now, the culprit is at large. Who would dare cause trouble? Who wouldn't be peaceful? In addition, that group of good-for-nothings are poking around over there and are a hindrance. Who would have the time to screen them one by one? It would be better to use the name of the military to collect them all up, then process them when there's time. This way, the government can save themselves a lot of trouble. So it was like this all along. Xie Junping suddenly realized that he was destined to be a sucker. Zhang Yingying had moved in a large circle. In the end, she was saying that Luo Nan and the others had run into the government and were caught in the crossfire by the crazy surge of implications by the military. Things absolutely weren't as dire as he had imagined. The 5 pieces of information were used in this way to form this conclusion. Xie Junping was on the verge of standing up and slamming his hands on the table. Finally, he remembered that this was a virtual reception room, but his expression was ugly to the extreme. Zhang Yingying understood his thoughts clearly. She immediately shook her head, sighing. "You're quite the hopeless type. If it was your father, it would already be too late to give thanks. The key point is the drugs." The drugs. Do you still need me to explain this clearly for you? Chapter 8, The Devouring Flames, Part 1-2. Drugs, the manufactured drugs. Xie Junping was not completely retarded. His brain had finally wound and turned to an understanding, but his mood turned even worse. Quantum Corporation especially wouldn't let others survive. It must be known that the Xie family owns a portion of the industry in the field, where the most cutting edge of drugs are produced and sold. Their strength was strong, but they lacked the confidence to truly compare themselves with Quantum Corporation, a megacorp valued to be one of the top 3 in the entire world. The Quantum Corporation rapidly erupted in power after the war. At the beginning of the 90s, they proposed the concept of burners using archetype formatting theory as the foundation. They created the Deep Blue platform by themselves, releasing the Deep Blue Walkers and changing the methods of war between mankind and the mutants. They immediately and effectively recovered a great deal of territory that was conventionally used by humanity. Everyone with insight knew that Quantum Corporation appeared to exert their strength in their weapons platform. Actually, their nature lies in performing sets of research, where really they made major breakthroughs in the life sciences. Their cumulative research in related fields was absolutely one of the very best in the world. Nowadays, this capital giant has at last extended their tentacles into the most cutting edge of the drug manufacturing field. The several drug companies where the Xie family has equity in might be in for a panic. But Xie Junping carefully reconsidered things. According to any investor worth their salt, those who first receive reliable information will have received an astonishing amount of wealth. Zhang Yingying looked at Xie Junping lost in thought. She crossed her arms and sneered. Sucker, was the information worth the price? Worth it, way worth it. Xie Junping had always used his face like a salesman. He lightly whipped out a happy and smiling face. Yingying, my friend, you've done me a huge favor. For all my life, I'll remember your good. Zhang Yingying's tiny face was so tender that water could be drawn with a pinch. Yet, her fundamental nature was that of an impervious lord. Her eyelids didn't even rise. Sounds good, Tilda. This year the fee will be raised by 50% then. I thank you on behalf of the boss. Xie Junping withered in a flash. He spoke hastily and messily. Oh, that's right, Quantum Corporation and Luo Nan. Is there a connection between them? That archetype formatting theory. Zhang Yingying responded lazily. No matter what academic misconduct that Yan Hong had, the results that he sold to Quantum Corporation were final. Personal strength has no meaning when compared to an investment group. The Quantum Corporation wouldn't pay any attention to these sorts of tiny ants. Don't go about scaring yourself, okay? Xie Junping wasn't concerned about this point though. He had actually made a connection to a different problem. He mumbled for quite a while before finally opening his mouth. If Luo Nan's been brought onto a warship, do you think he will? Just speak plainly. You're worried that others would sell you out. Zhang Yingying sneered. Even though the most normal thing would be to sell you out, he has yet to do so at the present. According to reliable information, he hasn't spoken a single word ever since he was brought in for custody. Really? Xie Junping was somewhat doubtful. According to common sense, Luo Nan didn't need to carry him for his sake. Zhang Yingying spread her hand open. One who's determined to leave his name in history as an anti-hero. You will never be able to guess what he's thinking. For example, the recording. Recording. Yep, that phantom of yours that's worth 500 million automatically recorded a security video. Did you really believe the police won't obtain it? Huh? Xie Junping only realized at this time. His face lost all color. Then. Zhang Yingying sighed. The police criminal records would have already turned to dust by the time you realize things. Relax, the records have already been deleted. Xie Junping's hands clasped together. He repeatedly expressed his gratitude. Thank you for your thorough work, Yingying. Can you not credit me for someone else's work? This was another righteous deed by our anti-hero. Dang, so virtuous. Xie Junping was really shocked this time. The car was under his name. This was an undisputable fact. All Luo Nan had to do was cooperate with the police by telling the truth. By using this together with a copy of the video recording, all suspicion towards Luo Nan would have been removed easily. But Luo Nan had chosen to delete the recording and keep silent, giving Xie Junping a cushion of leeway. This was an extremely huge favor. Xie Junping split his head thinking and was still unable to understand why Luo Nan was willing to go this far. In the end, all he could do was sigh emotionally. Virtuous, virtuous beyond compare. As Xie Junping spoke these words, he found himself deep in thought in an instant. Should he go with the flow and let this anti-hero carry him? He could always discuss how to make it up for him later on. But he thought things over again. It would also be fine if he was carried. If he was implicated, there's nothing he could do about it. The intermediate processes will surely increase in complexity, increasing the uncertainty significantly. The flying car Phantom was under his name. It would be hard for him to wipe himself clean no matter what. And he thought of Luo Nan, of the pair of bewitching heterochromic pupils. Xie Junpei's heart slightly trembled inexplicitly. He was unsure of the cause of this. Oh, Yingying, what do you? What's wrong? Did you sprain your head thinking? No, that didn't happen. Xie Junping thought a bit. It would be hard to talk about these kind of things. He might as well just heavily set his foot down and forget it. Other people have progressed things this far already. He can't be scared. He needs to first go fish some folks up before deciding what to do next. Yep, he'll let the anti-hero continue being righteous just as before. At this moment, Luo Nan, the anti-hero, was sitting alone in the corner. Ice-cold metal plating was behind his back and beneath his body. No markings of any kind were on all sides of him. It was a rough, cold hardiness befitting a warship, obscuring his thoughts. It was like a spiritual ghost that was soon absorbed by Luo Nan. The other people in the same room didn't have things as easy as he did. Each one of them had restless appearances. No one ever thought that they would actually be lifted into military warships and put in detention during what had been an ordinary security event. At first, this group of rich kids wailed about the procedures, about seeing lawyers. But after about an hour, not a single echo could be heard. The room was closed off from the outside. Only ice-cold warbots stood guard over them. Their bulky anti-riot guns looked to be terribly painful. Later on, the dozen or so people could only look at each other in dismay. They gradually calmed down. Luo Nan's head hung low. His breathing was indiscernible. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the morning right now. Normally, Luo Nan would be already waiting in the classroom for class to start at this time, and he would have eaten breakfast with a portion size for at least 5 people. At the present, Luo Nan could only eat meals using the most traditional chemical method of humanity, taking food and transforming it to energy. Replenishment through consumption. Notably, he had taken a few extra precautions. For instance, the energy bar he had inside his pocket. But today's mishap had caused him to use that energy bar early on. He no longer had a means to replenish himself. This, along with him missing his usual eating time, caused Luo Nan to feel as if a black hole had opened up in his stomach, squeezing the energy from his flesh and blood without limit. Under normal circumstances, the feeling of hunger wouldn't be as serious as it was now. But the causes behind Luo Nan being lifted onto the warship caused Luo Nan to be forced to expend a price. Luo Nan was forcefully detained under suspicion of carrying illegal drugs. Even though the police didn't have the time to go through the interrogation process, urine testing and related simple works had started shortly after boarding and were underway. This was a necessary execution of procedure. There was no explanations needed. Luo Nan could point to the sky and swear on the sun. He was 100% not a drug addict. He 100% never touched the drugs in the box. He 100% wasn't part of Xie Junping's no-good group of friends. But the problem was the drug mixture he had injected in the morning before he left home. The mixture contained a proportion of illegal ingredients that was absolutely off the charts. If everyone else in the room had their quantities of illegal ingredients added together, their total probably wouldn't even reach a fraction of his. By following down this path of logic, Luo Nan really was teaching himself. Anyway, he wouldn't be able to reason his way out of this. This was the exact reason why Luo Nan had deliberately activated his Appetite King skill immediately. He went all out in increasing the metabolism of his body. Time turned fast from Luo Nan's perspective. Chapter 8, The Devouring Flames, Part 2-2. The police were concerned with the most susceptible of psychotropic drug ingredients. These ingredients took 5 to 10 days to completely metabolize. Only a short half an hour had passed between the time when Luo Nan was arrested and when he was taken aboard the warship. Luo Nan had completed the entire metabolic process during this time. He focused on dispelling the susceptible ingredients within his drug concoction. So when they took his sample, Luo Nan exercised some control over his urinary system, allowing him to disregard ordinary urine tests. As for his other test samples, such as blood, hair, and the like, Luo Nan honestly wasn't sure of the outcome. Therefore, he kept his mouth shut ever since he was forcefully detained. He never had the slightest thought of exposing Xie Junping. Needless to say, he still needed to rely on that fellow's help in order for him to escape what was to come. There would be more or less a price to pay for choosing this route. Great amounts of energy from his internal organs were consumed from speeding up his metabolic rate. It was as if Luo Nan had fasted for over a week within a short hour of time. He sped up consumption of his fat reserves and atrophy of his muscles in order to maintain a supply of nutrients to his brain and nerve center. Neurons alternated between being excited and inhibited. All this led to Luo Nan feeling quite horrible at the moment. Pain, numbness, and slight hallucinations. His senses were being assaulted without end. Luo Nan sat on the ice-cold plating of the ship. He made not a single movement, but in reality, he was enduring torment through each strand of muscle. The fibers were twitching minutely. This represented that the functionality of his nervous system was in disorder. He closed his eyes, completely ignoring the rich kids complaining to each other in his surroundings. He chanted the 20 words. He started with the utmost familiarity of chanting the words as a liaison without pause. The humming sound vibrated within his skull cavity. However, his chanting speed grew slower and slower. His volume grew lower and lower. In the end, his lips and teeth no longer produced a sound. There were only brief words that bubble and flowed in his mind. My heart's a prison, my heart's a furnace. My heart calls for a lens, my heart calls for the nation. Following the influx of words in his mind, Luo Nan's attention gradually accumulated. Distracting thoughts were eliminated. He had automatically entered into the first step in visualization. Silvery lines like threads formed the structure of the tetrahedron, the inscribed sphere, and circumscribed sphere within the void. The structure resembled a wondrous celestial body that rotated in solitude within the darkness of the cosmos and space. He went through 5 years of hand-in-hand advancement of drug sculpting with chanting and breathing, causing his vessel to form a subtly paired relationship with the visualized diagram. A misfortune with the vessel would immediately affect the operation of the visualized diagram. On the other hand, he could actually sort through the structure of his vessel, using his thoughts to adjust the visualized diagram. Then plus or minus adjustments were made to his energy and blood, influencing the functionality of his internal organs. Luo Nan discovered that the damage to his vessel was dependent on the former, whereas increasing his metabolic rate and controlling his urinary system was dependent on the later. Of course, the later was equivalent to having the operation of his autonomic nervous system disrupted. It went against the natural functions of physiology. He had to pay a biting recall in price. And in this way, there were some issues with the rhythm of the revolving visualized diagram. Luo Nan had increased his metabolic rate for half an hour. Now he needed to use at least 3 times the amount of time to recover back to normal. Luo Nan handled this with experience. He arranged his mental state to be firm. In any case, he's been imprisoned. He doesn't need to think too much about matters happening on the outside. He just needs to slowly recover, and things will be fine. However, he soon discovered that the situation wasn't that simple. The rotating visualized diagram in the void began to exhibit clear signs of stuttering, and this stuttering was growing more and more severe. It was like a low-grade machine running a large-scale game. It was unable to render a smooth and full scene no matter what. And the situation would turn even more messy after this machine overheats. Later on, even the rhythm of chanting the mantra became influenced. It would be hard to maintain the visualization technique. The recoiling bite he received was actually this serious. Luo Nan refused to believe it. He halted his visualization technique and muttered to himself for a while. He adjusted his body and switched sitting positions. Luo Nan sat cross-legged. He was just like the monks and priests of the olden days, engaging in meditation. His entire body was firmly fixed to the plating of the ship. A straight line was formed from the top of his head to his sides, from the shoulders to the elbows to the knees, merging to the ground to form a solid pyramid. This pyramid sitting position was a visualization technique taught by Luo Nan's grandfather during Luo Nan's adolescence. It was for visualizing the diagram on the title page of his grandfather's notes. The pyramid form of the tetrahedron was like the boundary to his limbs and body. The inscribed sphere contained his internal organs and the operation of his energy and blood. The circumscribed sphere represented the environment of the external world. And so his body and mind were linked together. What was internal opposed what was external. The quality of the visualization became more exquisite. Normally, Luo Nan would be sleeping at night, but he instead replaced his sleep with strengthening the quality of his visualization technique. He entered chanting the mantra once more, smoothly starting the visualization. Silver threads formed the complete structure of the diagram, and the diagram began to slowly revolve. This time Luo Nan wasn't an observer, instead he was a participant. As he chanted the mantra, he started to become indistinct within the bounds of the visualized diagram. It was as if he had arrived within a borderless darkness. The manifestation of the majestic pyramid revolved within the void. In amidst of all this, he vaguely felt himself absolutely not moving. What moved was the flesh and blood of his internal organs. What moved was the external world with its void of darkness. Amidst the actions and inactions, the elements of harmony and discord peeled away layer by layer and revealed. What is this? There was clearly a type of force coming from within the surrounding, empty darkness. The dimensions weren't large, but it was actually quite solid. It was like there was a hand hiding in the darkness that always sought to displace the visualized diagram, to interfere with its stability and its balance. Luo Nan attempted to grab and hold onto the hand, but he was completely unable to make clear the existence and form of the hand. The response grew clearer, but he was unable to touch it no matter what. It was like an evening mosquito flitting by his ear. Even if he did ignore it, it was still extremely annoying. Or to be somewhat more precise, this was fundamentally an apparition that orbited and wandered his internal and external body. It wantonly swallowed the energy from his flesh, leaving him with no choice. As for the stuttering, it took a lot of effort to find out that he had been inflicted by an unusual virus. Luo Nan tried a few times to handle things with great difficulty. Instead, his mind was in disorder, distracting thoughts lumped together, and his heart was gradually filled with impatience. He had no choice but to abort from the fixed space. But the situation turned worse after he withdrew from the fixed space. The urging fretful state of his mind, coupled with the influence of his prior hunger, caused a sort of tingling numbness, pain, and even slight hallucinations to emerge. They transformed into a torrent of distracting thoughts that leapt forth from his mind. A flagrant counter-offensive was launched, wiping the landscape with power. It can also be described as a mass of venomous flames that boiled within his internal organs. Luo Nan's lips and teeth squirmed slightly, but what came out wasn't the 20-word chant. It was simple, irrational cursing. His current state was very bleak. Though he clearly knew his situation was bleak, he was unable to control it. Things have obviously turned even bleaker. An interference coming from the external world came following the instability of his mind. It was already quite difficult to block the external world. Now it turns out there were people resolutely coming over. "Hello," someone laughed in his ear. "Kid, have you been scared, dazed, or are you deaf?" Luo Nan slightly raised his head. He was unable to open his eyelids wide. He had exhausted too much energy, resulting in his current. He was not that perceptive to the external world. He had no idea about anything that had happened recently, nor was he interested in knowing. However, this person did not let him off. "You're very, very young. What are you playing at being so high and aloof?" Luo Nan finally raised his eyelids and observed this person. As it turns out, this person was precisely the only person he recognized in this room. Lion Yu. Table of Contents. Chapter 9, A Large Terror, Part 1-2. Lion Yu came over, having just regained clarity of mind. Her position within this circle of rich kids was somewhat vague. Without taking into account her family status, this was because she had two lovers at the same time. She had her feet in different boats. She had a relationship with Xie Junping and a relationship with her real boyfriend at the same time. This was the reason behind the uncertainty of her position. Because of this, she was met with ridicule upon being tossed out of the car by Xie Junping. It can be said that she went mad with anger. This, along with her hangover and related issues, caused Luo Nan to become the target of her venting. And that is how this situation came to be. Now that she's calmed down after being brought into the detainment room, Lion Yu's thought process underwent a minute change. Her anger towards Xie Junping had not lessened in the slightest, but she had a new plan regarding Luo Nan. She had been observing Luo Nan all this time. Most of the people in this cramped and noisy ad hoc detainment room were either dispirited and downcast or noisy and on edge. They gave off, from head to toe, an air full of defeat. Only Luo Nan, this big boy who looked to be the youngest of the bunch, continued sitting calmly in the corner from beginning to end. He was completely motionless the whole time aside from changing to a weird sitting position in the middle of it. The shadow of the corner lightly draped over Luo Nan's body, obscuring his silhouette and details. But the shadow matched him completely together as a whole to don forth a mysterious and profound persona, like a mask and cloak on a masquerade. That appearance of his looked very tasty. And so, Lion Yu got closer to Luo Nan to observe him at close range. His external features were provocative. Luo Nan's delicate, pretty, and quiet appearance was exactly her type. She was far more interested in him than in taking vengeance against Xie Junping. Of course, before things can happen, she needs to understand the relationship between Luo Nan and Xie Junping clearly. She needs to clarify why did Xie Junping hastily run away this early morning and then swap with this little fellow. Lion Yu really couldn't hide her thoughts. A person laughed mockingly to the side. Lion Jiyu, that guy's a herbivore, you two won't pair together. Herbivores are also quite refreshing and tasty tilde. Lion Yu didn't care at all about being called that nickname by other people. Jiyu was originally the title used in ancient times for imperial concubines of the court. Its status was dignitary, and it also contained a meaning of harmfulness and beauty. It was not a bad nickname at all. She naturally ignored this appeared flatterer, even if he did have malice from inferring a meaning outside of the palace. Lion Yu was fundamentally someone who was truly carried the spirit of an omnivore, and she had quite the natural resources. Her solid and intense facial features carried a bit of a flavor of someone with mixed blood. And what was really unfair was her well-developed and tall figure. She even deliberately wore a skin-tight but wrapping wine-red mini-skirt. Her bulging buttocks were alluring, giving way to a slender waist and long legs. Her charms were highlighted to the greatest limits. She borrowed a male jacket to drape over herself in order to stay warm in these days. But she had a habit of articulating with gestures when she spoke, causing the front of the jacket to automatically open up to reveal wantonly the shadows of the contortions of coy, snow-white flesh. It formed a first-class natural work of art that was simply capable of sucking in the gazes of all the males in the vicinity. However, all Luo Nan could feel was fretfulness and pain. Lion Yu had a complete change in attitude towards Luo Nan. She wanted to play around for a bit. She giggled as she spoke and went to pat Luo Nan on the shoulder. Not much force was really contained in the palm that slapped down. But right now Luo Nan has returned to the state when he had just separated from Xie Junping. He would feel pain even when the moisture from fog collides with his face. The landing of this palm was simply an axe cleaving down on his shoulder. His entire arm to his shoulder felt no longer his in a split second. Luo Nan's entire face twitched once. Lion Yu took him to be nervous instead. Her hand rested on Luo Nan's shoulder, no longer coming down. She borrowed some support and lowered her waist enticingly. "We're all prison buddies, going through a common tribulation. Won't you introduce yourself to me?" Any other male would enjoy receiving this signal for material benefits. However, for Luo Nan at this moment, all he wanted was to punch her in the face. Pain. It was really painful. Luo Nan felt like a flame was burning in his chest. In fact, his hand had already been clenched into a fist. But his remaining reason told him that this person didn't harbor any deep animosity nor hatred. It was only the habitual hunting of a carnivorous woman and nothing more. Luo Nan tried to use reason to let go of some energy and return to his normal state. He spoke in a tone as smooth as possible to reply, "Acumen College, 10th grade, Luo Nan." "Whoa, you really are my junior, or are you a tasty young hunk?" Lion Yu was quite pleasantly surprised. The more she looked at Luo Nan right now, the more he was pleasing to the eye. A delicate, pretty, and tender face paired with cold and cool expression. And there was that serious sitting position. She couldn't tell if he was angry or shy. He was really quite adorable. She could not hold herself back from taking some liberties with Luo Nan. She extended her hand to go touch Luo Nan's face. Her intentions were too clear. This, along with her perverse signaling for material benefits, drew in the envy of a few people. A hand suddenly probed forth, pinching Luo Nan's cheek in a rush, in another giggling manner. Yet when she went to exert force with her fingertips, Luo Nan's face was pinched to a different shape. "Tasty hunk, are you tasty?" Luo Nan's heart thumped with an echo. His brain didn't function as he relied completely on his body's instincts. He waved his hand with force to swat her filthy hand away. This action brought an intense reaction from a heavily drunk and drugged fellow. This person was undoubtedly intensely agitated. This meddler was in a completely bad mood and took the opportunity to send over kick. He brought it here. This foot kicked ferociously onto Luo Nan's shoulder. Its strength was massive. Luo Nan's body tilted to the side, even bringing Lion Yu with him. In the chaos, Luo Nan's notebook that had been resting on his knee was swept away by Lion Yu's hand when she lost her balance, sliding 2 to 3 meters away. Lion Yu was wearing 10-centimeter high heels. She had nearly sprained her ankle in the confusion. She avoided falling on the ground only by using Luo Nan for support. She felt exhausted, then the anger in her mind reached to its peak in an instant. "Lixuecheng, what the hell?" Then Li Zhu Cheng used an even louder voice to roar back. "Hell with you, slutty epicenter." Lion Yu was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. Her shrieking voice jumped an octave. She brandished her manicured nails towards Li Zhu Cheng's face in greeting. This fight was something that could not happen. Li Zhu Cheng's slip of his tongue had already caused Xie Junping to lose face. If he went ahead to touch Lion Yu, he really would have his face be clawed a few times. He would later be no longer able to mingle with this crowd. He would duck out henceforth. Naturally, there would be enough people here to stop the fight. This group of rich kids just had their spirits oppressed by being in this prison. They were on the verge of exploding. If right now there was a lively situation, each one of them would be dauntless to be the first to make a move. They left aside reason and thought it would be good if they could take advantage of the beauty's body. Lion Yu was already restrained by 3 or 4 big masters before she could rush forward. Words of pacification came left and right. Her body ate quite a few hands of righteousness from head to toe. Her face was ashen from anger. Her high heels flashed forth. It didn't matter who it was, they were all kicked heavily. She kicked the group of males into dispersing chaotically. Then finally 2 girls with pretty faces had enough of the chaos. They persuaded her half honest and half faking. Only then was Lion Yu able to be barely pacified. Li Zucheng broke free from the marring crisis. His face was quite injured. Even more so, he had a demonic flame burning in his stomach that had yet to be vented. His eyes swept crazily all over the place before it finally landed on the pretty boy that had started this mess. Luo Nan was staggering up at this moment. He went to go pick up his notebook with the attitude of a person with nothing better to do. F*CKU atten percent asterisk. Li Zucheng sent a kick behind Luo Nan's waist without a single thought. That's a wrap for this installment. Thank you all for watching and supporting Lord of the Stories. If you enjoyed this tale, please hit the like button, share it, and subscribe for more amazing stories. You can also explore other series updated daily in our playlists. Have a fantastic day and see you in the next episode.